Chapter 1206. Xinyuan Wuxiang's father's evaluation of Li Tianlan, which seemed a little shocking now. Seeing that Li Tianlan didn't get angry, Xinyuan Wuxiang told him the whole evaluation. A qualified guardian, an unqualified shaper, a big idiot. This was the evaluation of Li Tianlan from the great emperor whom he had never met. Li Tianlan smiled faintly. He was really not angry. He was just a little curious about the person who called him a big idiot and even thought he was an idiot. After saying that he was looking forward to meeting him, they went to the dining hall of Emperor Dong's palace and ordered some food. Xinyuan Wuxiang gobbled up the food to replenish his energy. Li Tianlan casually fiddled with the rice in front of him, a little lost in thought. "By the way, brother, I just found a problem and forgot to tell you." Xinyuan Wuxiang took a sip of coke and sighed comfortably. This young fat man with a beer belly didn't like drinking. At first, he liked to carry a bucket of purified water and take a few sips from time to time. But this habit didn't last long and he began to crazily like Coke, Fanta, Sprite and other messy drinks. So far, it was said that Xinyuan Wuxiang's highest record was 12 bottles a day. 1-liter bottles. It was said that Xinyuan Wuxiang didn't drink water anymore. Whether in Yuzhou or Emperor Dong's palace, all he drank was Coke. Such brave deeds made Li Tianlan's scalp numb. He once reminded Xinyuan Wuxiang to be careful not to drink himself to death. Xinyuan Wuxiang smiled and said he was not afraid because he was a doctor. Li Tianlan quietly thought that maybe soon he would find a small clinic in Emperor Dong's palace that had more Coke bottles than all kinds of medicine. Maybe it would develop into a hospital in the future. His eyes wandered and fell on Xinyuan Wuxiang's face. "What's the matter?" "There's something wrong with Li Guangtu's body." Xinyuan Wuxiang thought and hesitated, as if he didn't know how to explain in detail. Finally he shook his head. "I've studied his martial arts. Perhaps in the dark world, this unique skill was not as famous as the sword of 6 paths of reincarnation and the 24 moves of sword. But in a sense, the immortality seal was derived from the 24 moves of sword. To be exact, it was derived from the 24 moves of sword and the sword of 6 paths of reincarnation. It takes into account most of the advantages of the 6 paths of reincarnation sword and the 24 moves of sword, but it also inherits the shortcomings of the two unique skills. The reason why Li Guangtu was able to reach his current level after his martial arts foundation was shattered is not only because of his amazing talent, but also because of the unique way of exerting power of the immortal seal. You should know this very well. Li Tianlan was silent for a while and nodded. The immortality seal derived from the 24 moves of swordsmanship was not difficult for Li Tianlan at the moment. The way this unique skill exerted force was indeed extremely strange. However, under normal circumstances, the combination of the three would be the complete sword, and it would also be the most realistic sword. On the other hand, the foundation of the undying seal was nothingness. This feeling was hard to explain in detail. To be exact, Li Guangtu was not in the invincible realm. Could even be said that he had no realm. After his martial arts foundation was shattered, it had never been repaired. To some extent, the immortality seal was beyond the scope of the sword energy and the sword intent. It could even be said to be the destructive power that erupted from the spirit and will. This was pure nothingness. Because it was not real, it was ever-changing and everywhere. All the destructive power of the immortality seal and all the sword energy of Li Guangtu could be regarded as the eruption of the spiritual power. He came to this day from a state where his martial arts were completely crippled. He used the experience of the past, which was illusory. When this illusory experience acted on his spirit and will, his spiritual power exploded with power similar to the 4 realms of martial arts. For example, the storm, the ice, the raging fire, the thunderbolt, and even the sword light of the invincible realm. Almost all the exertion of the immortality seal focused on the spiritual domain. Therefore, even if Li Guangtu was seriously injured, he still had a strong combat capability. As long as he was energetic and determined, the combat capability he could exert was almost unimaginable. Because his unique skill consumed not physical strength but spirit. "I don't like this unique skill," Xinyuan Wuxiang said blandly, "but it's very interesting. I heard that Senior Li used to be a world-famous master in the spiritual domain in the dark world. Although he didn't reach the so-called transcendent realm, he was infinitely close to this domain. So it should be normal for Li Guangtu to have some research in this field." "The immortality seal is not hypnosis." Li Tianlan frowned. "Of course not." Xinyuan Wuxiang smiled. "The word hypnosis is very vivid. The immortality seal has nothing to do with hypnosis. This unique skill, to some extent, combines the sword energy of the 24 moves of sword, but it uses the explosive power of the 6 paths of reincarnation sword of the Wang family of Beihai. This is the core. Li Kuangtu's spiritual outburst evolved into sword energy. Under that level of outburst, hypnosis becomes a very powerless thing. It can't be done and there is no need to do it. A person who can resist that level of spiritual outburst is not hypnotized by that level of spiritual power. So what you mean is? Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes. Spiritual power is a very magical thing. Xinyuan Wushang said softly, Big brother, your swordsmanship pursues reality and illusion. Then let me ask you a question. Do you know what the end of illusion is? It's reality, Li Tianlan said blandly. An answer full of the charm of order and absolutely accurate. Xinyuan Wushang's eyes lit up. Have you ever thought about sister-in-law? He suddenly paused, shook his head subconsciously and changed the topic. Let's give an example. For example, the old man in the Holy Land. His spiritual power is in the so-called transcendent realm, and it is very stable. But the extent of his spiritual outburst is very poor, so he can only hypnotize the enemy, and it is more than enough to protect himself. Under such circumstances, I'm almost sure that even if you go to kill him, it will be difficult to succeed. But Li Kuangtu is different. His spiritual power is not as strong as that of the old man in the Holy Land, but it is full of explosive power. He doesn't know how to use these things gently, so every time it erupts, it is uncontrollable, so he can't hypnotize others. The instantaneous eruption brings the most powerful lethality. You mean that spiritual power is illusory, but the end of illusion is reality, so Li Kuangtu's spiritual power has reached the level where he can turn illusion into reality. He is far from it. Xinyuan Wushang twitched the corner of his mouth disdainfully. He only uses the explosive power of the 6 paths of reincarnation. For a short moment, his spiritual power can become close to reality, so there is the current sword energy and sword light. These things have lethality, but they can only exist for a moment. How can they be real? He took a deep look at Li Tianlan and said softly, What is real should be eternal. Li Tianlan looked at him thoughtfully. What are you trying to say? It's still about spiritual power. Xinyuan Wushang lowered his head and took a big gulp of coke. Although there is a threshold for spiritual power at this stage, the threshold is very small compared to martial arts. Li Kuangtu can't make any progress in martial arts. To be exact, he is actually a useless person. All his combat power is concentrated in spiritual power. If I'm not wrong, Li Kuangtu's spiritual power should be very close to that of that old man in the Holy Land. Once he breaks through, Li Tianlan's eyes narrowed tightly. So, Xinyuan Wushang smiled. Now it seems that the biggest threat to you is Wang Xingxiao, who is integrating Wang Tianzong's sword energy. In fact, the biggest threat to you is Li Kuangtu, but he doesn't know it himself. Chapter 1207. There was no need for Xinyuan Wushang to explain anything. Li Tianlan had already understood what he meant and knew what he had overlooked before. He was very familiar with the Undying Seal. In fact, he couldn't be more familiar with it. He knew every move of the Immortality Seal, including the comprehensive move like the back of his hand, or it could be said that his fire was pure. He didn't steal from Li Kuangtu. This unique skill itself was a branch of martial arts derived from the 24 moves of sword. He completely understood the 24 moves of sword, so he naturally understood the Immortality Seal. Therefore, Li Tianlan could also use the Immortality Seal, and it often worked wonders. Even in the same realm, the Immortality Seal in his hands was different from Li Kuangtu's. The difference was not in anything else but in terms of destructive power. Every move of the Immortality Seal in Li Tianlan's hands was more fierce and majestic than Li Kuangtu's. But compared with Li Kuangtu, he always lacked a trace of smoothness and freedom. Li Tianlan always thought that this was the problem, that his study of the 24 moves of sword was not thorough enough. In terms of overall understanding of the 24 moves of sword, he might be able to surpass Li Kuangtu in all aspects, but a different understanding of a certain sword could cause this situation. He knew that his essence was pointed out by Xinyuan Wushang. The fifth on the divine list. Li Kuangtu, whose combat capability had obviously surpassed the peak of the invincible realm, was still a useless man in essence. Li Tianlan could vaguely feel that Li Kuangtu's body was a little strange, but he never thought that it would be such a result. Li Kuangtu was not in the invincible realm. He didn't even have a realm. In the War of Treason, his destroyed martial arts foundation had never been repaired at all. The so-called Immortality Seal could reshape the foundation was a lie from the beginning. His body was nourished by a large amount of vitality, so that the strength of his body returned to the peak state. As for the foundation, He never thought about it at all. Every move of the immortality seal that could destroy heaven and earth was essentially the power of the spiritual domain. The power of the mind was naturally more unpredictable and strange, but it was also naturally more mellow and free. Li Tianlan deeply mastered the 24 moves of sword. But he knew little about the 6 paths of reincarnation. He could copy Wang Xingxiao's 6 paths of reincarnation, but he could only copy it, not master it. In other words, if he fought with Wang Xingxiao and Wang Xingxiao didn't use the 6 paths of reincarnation, he naturally couldn't use it either. But Li Kuangtu knew the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation. The essence of martial arts of the Wang family of Beihai was outburst. He combined this kind of essence with the 24 moves of sword and applied it to the spiritual field. From the outbreak of physical strength to the outbreak of spiritual strength, it was more natural, faster, and more bizarre. This was the true state of Li Kuangtu. There is no doubt that Li Kuangtu is a true genius. There is no doubt about that. There was undisguised admiration in Shenyuan Wuxiang's voice. From his point of view, the combination of the 24 moves of sword and the 6 paths of reincarnation and the transfer from physical strength to spiritual strength was unimaginable. It could even be said that it was an almost coincidental result of the concentrated inspiration of absolute genius. For Li Tianlan, the significance of this matter was that Li Kuangtu had changed his fighting style, but how could it be so simple? From the perspective of the spacetime corridor, this matter was completely equivalent to Li Kuangtu transferring his own authority. He had been transferred from the authority of a martial artist to the authority of the lawful camp. He had inadvertently touched the rules of the world and finally walked on the path represented by Qin Weibai. What did this mean? If this matter was spread back, the entire spacetime corridor would be in an uproar. Perhaps Li Kuangtu's strength was nothing, but his success in the transfer of authority meant that the human clan could be more flexible under the starry sky in the future, and it also meant that the authority of neutrality was further expanded. He treated Li Kuangtu and controlled his physical data, so it would take him a long time to write the report to the spacetime corridor. So, you mean that Li Kuangtu will break through soon? Li Tianlan's eyes flickered slightly. Maybe it will be faster than you can imagine. Shenyuan Wuxiang smiled softly. In fact, I think that if he hadn't been in a state of injury in recent years, he might have succeeded in breaking through now. Big brother, you know what this means? Of course, Li Tianlan knew what it meant. Once Li Kuangtu entered the transcendent realm in the spiritual field, it was equivalent to him entering the supreme realm from another perspective. The old man in the Holy Land was the best example. In the spiritual field, the old man in the Holy Land was supreme. That kind of spiritual power could completely affect the current Li Tianlan. That old man without any martial arts might be the only person Li Tianlan couldn't kill now. And Li Kuangtu was different from that old man. His spiritual power was huge, but he didn't know how to use it conventionally at present, so Li Kuangtu didn't know hypnosis, but he knew what the old man in the Holy Land didn't know. The outburst of spiritual power. Even Li Tianlan felt it a little incredible when he thought about it, and he had to sigh at Li Kuangtu's genius. He mastered the essence of the outburst of the 6 paths of reincarnation sword and turned the outburst of physical strength into the outburst of spiritual power. If Li Kuangtu entered the transcendent realm in the spiritual field, his comprehensive combat capability would definitely not be weaker than that of Wang Tianzong when he was in Mormons. The destructive power might be a little weaker, but it was more unpredictable and impossible to guard against. A heavenly son who turned the spiritual power into martial arts. Li Tianlan was very confident, but he also knew very well that he was indeed invincible now. But if he fought against Wang Tianzong when he was in Mormons? Unless the ruthless energy was at its peak, he had less than a 30% chance of winning against Wang Tianzong at that time. Well, to be precise, the chance of winning was almost equal to 0. But now, according to Shenyuan Wuxiang, Li Kuangtu seemed to have reached the point where he could break through at any time. The premise was that his injury was healed. He really gave me a surprise. Li Tianlan suddenly laughed and whispered to himself, "Why him?" Shenyuan Wuxiang didn't say a word, bowing his head and gulping. Li Tianlan took out a cigarette and lit it, saying calmly, "What do you think?" "I can't give any opinion." Shenyuan Wuxiang smiled innocently. "I just give the result. As for how to decide, it's all up to you. Kill him or let him go. Big brother, if you want to kill him, you have to be quick. Don't give face to anyone. His threat is beyond imagination. If you decide to let him go, then you have to ask Zhongzhou State to give you a good price." The melodious ringtone of the phone rang as soon as Shenyuan Wuxiang's voice fell. Li Tianlan took out his mobile phone and looked at the number. His eyes slightly narrowed, and then he picked it up and called the minister with a smile. Dongqing Wudi's slow but still steady voice sounded on the other end of the phone. Tianlan, I'm coming to Emperor Dong's palace right now. Chapter 1208. Before the helicopter landed, Dongqing Wudi could clearly feel the almost boiling atmosphere in Emperor Dong's palace. He came quickly. And the news from the dark world was one step faster. The new ranking list on the divine list caused a sensation in the dark world when Dongqing Wudi just entered the sky over Shenyuan City. When the helicopter landed on the tarmac of Emperor Dong's palace, it was greeted by the almost fanatical noise in every corner of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan stood quietly on the lawn and looked at Dongqing Wudi, who came out with a smile on his face. Tianlan, congratulations. Dongqing Wudi laughed. The relief that had been suppressed for many years was being released from his soul little by little. At this moment he seemed to be much younger. The youngest one on the divine list, at least the next half a century is your time. Dongqing Wudi held Li Tianlan's hand tightly and sighed with emotion. Now, those who are standing against us, I'm afraid they won't even be able to sleep well. The current Emperor Dong's palace deserves all this. Li Tianlan chuckled softly, looking relaxed. The ranking of the divine list was a storm for the dark world. For countries in the world, it was a comparison of strength in some aspects. On different occasions the list had different meanings. But for the parties involved, what was the significance of the list? At least for Li Tianlan it was meaningless. He had always believed that he was invincible. It didn't matter whether he was ranked first or last, or even not on the list. His opponents would not surrender without a fight just because he was the first on the divine list, nor would they despise him because he was not on the divine list. No matter how the list was arranged, it didn't mean much to Emperor Dong's palace. What Li Tianlan wanted to do or didn't want to do would not change because of the list. The only effect might be to raise the morale a little. You're the one who deserves all of this. Dongqing Wudi patted Li Tianlan on the shoulder. Li Tianlan followed Dongqing Wudi and said in a calm tone, "What do you think of Emperor Dong's palace, minister?" "I don't have any opinion, but it's a suggestion." Dongqing Wudi looked around and said, "Now Emperor Dong's palace has the strength, but the development time is short, and the interior is still a little chaotic. This is a common problem for any new force, but any new force is not when it was first established, it was far more cohesive than the other forces. Do you know why?" He didn't wait for Li Tianlan's answer and said directly, "Because any new force has a clear goal at the beginning of its establishment. It has a clear goal, but there is no huge benefit for the time being. So everyone inside is struggling and wants to conquer everything outside. It was the same for Emperor Dong's palace in the beginning, but things are different now. It will be solved." Li Tianlan nodded. He agreed with Dongqing Wudi's view. In fact, not only Dongqing Wudi, but many people who had a deep understanding of the development process of Emperor Dong's palace had the same concern. Emperor Dong's palace was indeed a new power, and its internal cohesion was still there. But what was different from other new powers was that the interests within Emperor Dong's palace were enough to destroy anyone's rationality. Huge interests formed a chain of interests, which became more and more obvious inside Emperor Dong's palace. And it was certain that as Li Tianlan climbed to the top of the divine list, Emperor Dong's palace would absorb more and more interests in the future. Under such circumstances, an organization whose internal duties were not very clear was bound to have great hidden dangers. Perhaps because of Li Tianlan's existence, Emperor Dong's palace would not fall apart. But if Emperor Dong's palace fell into a quagmire of internal strife, it would undoubtedly be no good for its future development. They were the first group of people who followed Li Tianlan to conquer the country. Li Tianlan couldn't even deal with them seriously. Badian and the people of Sai City are not right, are they? Dongqing Wudi asked calmly. As the focus of the whole dark world, Emperor Dong's palace had no secrets to some extent. Maybe there were many things that the dark world couldn't see clearly. But after Emperor Dong's palace merged with some forces of Mount Shu, the Flourishing Age Fund, and Sai City after several meetings, everyone could feel the subtle relationship between Li Badian and Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud of Sai City. The parliament of Zhongzhou State could naturally get the news. He's too sensitive. But at present they are not at odds, but we do need to pay attention to it. Li Tianlan said softly. Do you know the reason? Dongqing Wudi smiled. It's not a secret. Li Tianlan also smiled, but he felt a little helpless. Li Badian and Sai City. To be exact, the relationship between Mount Shu and Sai City had never been harmonious. Li Badian and Cool Breeze and Drifting Cloud were in a tit-for-tat relationship. And there was also a knot between Saint and Situ Tsangyue. The reason was well known. Yun Qinshi, the Phantom Sword Master, one of the four sword masters of Mount Shu, Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State, and Li Shi, the current palace master of Emperor Dong's palace, had been passed down to this day. These three women could be said to be absolutely incompatible rivals in love. It sounded melodramatic, but it was the truth. After Li Guangtu failed at the border, he lost contact with the three of them. Li Shi became the wife of the governor of Kunlun City, Situ Tsangyue went to Mount Taibai, and Yun Qinshi still stayed in Mount Shu. As Li Shi quieted down, Situ Tsangyue, who later established Sai City, was directly targeted by Yun Qinshi. The contradiction between Mount Shu and Sai City had lasted for many years. This kind of contradiction, after Emperor Dong's palace absorbed Nirvana Sword and Great Void Sword of Mount Shu and Sai City, was directly brought to the inside of Emperor Dong's palace. However, after all, it was just a contradiction, not a hatred. So both sides behaved very restrained. Today's subtle relationship was just a long-accumulated unpleasantness, and they couldn't get over it for the time being. It was impossible for Li Beidian and Saint to fight with Sai City for Yun Qinshi. After all, now they were on the same side. And Yun Qinshi, as Li Guangtu's former woman, this phantom sword master who had followed Li Tianlan's Snowdance Corps to fight in Snow Country, was an expert of the half-step invincible realm. Shortly after Li Guangtu's identity was exposed 2 years ago, she had joined the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Of the former four sword masters of Mount Shu, only Han Chongyang, the Yin and Yang sword master, was still in Mount Shu. Emperor Dong's palace will enter a period of rapid expansion next. I also intend to take advantage of this time to stabilize the internal structure of Emperor Dong's palace. This matter is already being done. Minister, rest assured, everything is still under control. Li Tianlan said lightly. I have nothing to worry about. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. It's just a necessary reminder. Li Tianlan said, Minister, did you come here today for this? This was definitely a question that he knew the answer to. Dongqing Wudi smiled bitterly and said softly, How is Li Guangtu? Chapter 1209. Dongqing Wudi's voice echoed in the night, a little bitter, a little difficult, and a little dignified. What happened to Li Guangtu now? The whole Zhongzhou state was very concerned about this issue. The news they got was that Li Guangtu fell into Li Tianlan's hands. As for what happened after that, all the news was cut off. Why did Dongqing Wudi come here in such a hurry? It could be said that he knew that the list of the divine list would be released in the near future, but the most important thing was to determine Li Guangtu's state. Li Tianlan left a lot of memorable impressions in the dark world, all kinds of impressions. But no matter what kind of impressions they were, they had nothing to do with being good-tempered and easygoing. Radical, strong, crazy, indifferent, cruel, decisive, straightforward, and impulsive. He was in his early 20s, an age where no one would be surprised by what he did. Li Guangtu fell into Li Tianlan's hands. If they didn't agree with each other, it was entirely possible for Li Tianlan to kill him directly, and the possibility was not small. Dongqing Wudi never thought that Li Tianlan was a fool. Even if Li Tianlan couldn't see the current situation clearly, military counselor, Saint Situ Tsangyue, and even Li Shi, as well as the old people of the Li family in Emperor Dong's palace, were enough to serve as the think tanks of Emperor Dong's palace. If Li Tianlan didn't pay attention to it, they would pay attention to it and tell Li Tianlan. So Li Tianlan must now know the importance of Li Guangtu. This was also what made Dongqing Wudi most nervous. In his mind, Li Tianlan's answer was very important. If Li Tianlan killed Li Guangtu before he came, there would be no need to say anything. On the contrary, if Li Guangtu was still alive at this time, it meant that Li Tianlan was also waiting for the conditions of Zhongzhou state. At least it meant that this matter could be discussed and it could be a happy ending. What Zhongzhou state needed was a living Li Guangtu. If Li Tianlan killed him directly, Dongqing Wudi was not sure whether Zhongzhou state would fall out with Li Tianlan for a dead man. But if it really happened, there would be a lot of trouble. Li Tianlan glanced at Dongqing Wudi and then laughed coldly. He's not dead yet. He's in a coma and he's badly injured. Dongqing Wudi let out a long breath without concealing it and whispered, You don't want to kill him. Li Tianlan said calmly, You don't want me to kill him? Dongqing Wudi silently took out a cigarette and handed it to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan took out a lighter and lit it for him. The two stood under the night sky of Tianan and smoked. Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath. To be precise, it's the parliament that doesn't want you to kill him. Li Huaqing's intentions. Li Tianlan said blandly. It was not a question but an affirmative statement. His voice was very calm, but just a simple address seemed to cause the surrounding temperature to drop. Dongqing Wudi's smoking hands stiffened for a moment. Before he could speak, Li Tianlan had already laughed. There seemed to be countless long swords in the sky and earth of Emperor Dong's palace, and the overwhelming sword energy was moving slowly. Li Tianlan's voice was a little cold. He said he would give me an explanation about Gu Xingyun, so I didn't make a fuss and waited for him to give me an explanation. But now he didn't give me the explanation he wanted to give me. Instead, he wanted to intervene in the internal affairs of the Li family? Minister, do you think that if I take a step back, the parliament will think that I'm easy to bully? If I take a step back, the parliament will think that Emperor Dong's palace is a group of bloodless cowards? The night slowly twisted, and the majestic sword energy suddenly covered the starry sky. A huge vortex with a diameter of tens of thousands of meters formed over the entire Shenyuan city in an instant. Li Tianlan's voice was low. What should I do to make the parliament understand what the real Emperor Dong's palace is? Tianlan? Dongqing Wudi took a deep breath and reached out to press Li Tianlan's shoulder. Li Tianlan did not move. The vortex of sword energy in the sky began to disappear as his mood eased, but Shenyuan city under the night sky was bitterly cold. Dongqing Wudi frowned. He found that he seemed to have misunderstood Li Tianlan's meaning. Originally, he thought that there would only be two results when he came here. The first was that Li Guangtu had been killed, and the second was that Li Guangtu was alive, which meant that Li Tianlan was also ready to negotiate. But now it seemed that it was not the case at all. He sighed and said slowly, "What are you going to do about Li Guangtu?" "He won't die." Li Tianlan said faintly, "I won't kill him for Grandpa or for Rushi. But there is always a price to pay for doing something wrong. When he wakes up, I will talk to him. If he can realize his mistake, it will be the best. If he doesn't know his mistake, I will find a place to let him calm down and reflect on it slowly until he figures it out." "Do you want to imprison him?" Dongqing Wudi's face changed slightly. Li Tianlan did not speak but looked at Dongqing Wudi quietly. Zhongzhou State. Zhongzhou State needs the power of the purgatory of heaven capital. Dongqing Wudi hesitated. What Li Huaqing needs is checks and balances. The power of Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan corrected Dongqing Wudi's statement. The purgatory of heaven capital is a part of the Li family, and the Li family is mine. This is my Li family. Isn't it ridiculous that he wants to use my things to check and balance me and even stop me? What are you going to do? Dongqing Wudi was silent for a long time and then he sighed deeply. What's your attitude, minister? Li Tianlan asked suddenly. He stopped where he was and looked at Dongqing Wudi silently. Dongqing Wudi also stopped and looked at Li Tianlan quietly. There was no dissatisfaction, no sharpness, no hostility in Li Tianlan's eyes, and they were not so deep and unpredictable. He just looked at Dongqing Wudi silently, and his eyes were even a little dull, without any emotion. Dongqing Wudi's heart twitched fiercely. At this moment he stood very close to his son, but the gap in their thinking was very far. The parliament is very sincere. Dongqing Wudi said in a low voice, the president is willing to do his best to help the new group rise. After Nanyue he is willing to give Beijiang to the new group. At present, although the new group does not have enough cutting-edge power, if it is willing to talk, it may be possible to make an exception and promote one. And you know very well what Beijiang means. I can also tell you that this is not all. As long as you are willing to talk, the new group will get more, and even the border control corps is not out of the question. The attitude of the parliament is actually very clear. They don't mind the strength of Emperor Dong's palace. They are afraid that an unrivaled Emperor Dong's palace will lose its goal in the future. As for me, Dongqing Wudi laughed at himself and said, if you are not going to kill Li Guangtu, I have no attitude. I am just a lobbyist, but I am not going to persuade you. After a long silence, Dongqing Wudi seemed to have made up his mind and said faintly, you are my son, whether you admit it or not, it is a fact. Therefore your attitude is my attitude. I support any decision you make, but I hope your decision is rational. This was the first time that Dongqing Wudi had clearly talked about Li Tianlan's life experience. Although Li Tianlan had understood it before. Li Tianlan's body was stiff in place. After a long time, he slowly opened his mouth and said in a hoarse voice, thank you. The text message prompt sounded on his mobile phone. Dongqing Wudi took out his mobile phone, looked down at the screen, narrowed his eyes and whispered, Li Huaqing is here. Chapter 12:10. A kind of unexpected emotion spread in Dongqing Wudi's heart. Li Huaqing came. Why did he come here? What was he doing here? This seemingly abrupt action of the other party suddenly showed an unusual flavor. Dongqing Wudi was a little confused and instinctively vigilant. I talked to him not long ago. After that, I set off here as soon as possible. Dongqing Wudi looked at Li Tianlan. Under normal circumstances, he should be waiting for my news in the Hidden Dragon Sea. He came here at this time? He came with bad intentions? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. It's hard to say. It's not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing. Dongqing Wudi shook his head. I understand. It mainly depends on how I deal with Li Guangtu, right? Li Tianlan flicked his fingers gently, and the burning cigarette between his fingers flew out. The sword energy surged and the cigarette was directly smashed into the finest powder. A flame floated in front of him for a moment and then went out. He really cares about the purgatory of heaven capital in Li Guangtu. Is he so impatient? Li Tianlan's tone was mocking. Maybe he was stimulated by the divine list ranking. Dongqing Wudi's voice was a little irritated. Everything seemed to be getting out of control. Li Huaqing couldn't wait to rush to Xinyuan City. Not to mention anything else, at least it was certain that Li Huaqing's inner thoughts had changed without anyone knowing. What Li Tianlan said was actually right. Li Huaqing came here with bad intentions. On the contrary, the uncertainty of what he said was not necessarily a bad thing or a good thing, was a kind of self-comfort. Li Tianlan was not a fool, and neither was Dongqing Wudi. Both of them knew very well what it meant for Li Huaqing to come to Xinyuan City at this time, before he heard from Dongqing Wudi and before he was sure of Li Tianlan's attitude. It couldn't be a good thing. The sense of oppression brought by the personal arrival of the president of Zhongzhou State had crushed over half of the territory of Zhongzhou State at the moment the news came. In an irresistible gesture, it completely crushed the last leeway between Emperor Dong's palace and the parliament. This was the strength that Li Huaqing rarely showed. The personal arrival of the president was completely different from the arrival of Dongqing Wudi. Dongqing Wudi could represent the parliament of Zhongzhou State. He could use any identity to talk to Li Tianlan about Li Guangtu. If it went well, everyone would be happy. Even if it went badly, it didn't matter. Dongqing Wudi couldn't do it. Next time Wu Jingmin could do it. If Wu Jingmin couldn't come to an agreement, then Zhou Mulin would come over. Even Zhou Yunhai and Guo Wenyan could come to talk to him one by one, confirm Li Tianlan's attitude in the negotiations, and then give him one bargaining chip after another. This is a stalemate process. This was a necessary seesaw process. Many negotiations required probing over and over again. As long as Li Huaqing was different, there would still be room for negotiation. Under normal circumstances, when the negotiation was almost done, Li Huaqing would participate in the last negotiation and make the final decision before taking Li Guangtu away. It might take a long time, but it wouldn't drag on until after the election. But now, everything in this plan, everything that would have happened under normal circumstances, was skipped over. Li Huaqing did not wait. As the president of Zhongzhou State, he was leading the entire power of Zhongzhou State from Yuzhou to Tianan. There was no room for negotiation. He was extremely tough. Everyone knew that when Li Huaqing came to Tianan and left Xinyuan City, there would only be two results. Either Zhongzhou State would take Li Guangtu away, or Zhongzhou State would destroy Emperor Dong's palace. It was impossible for the second result to happen. The prestige of the president of Zhongzhou State could not be consumed in the endless tug-of-war and negotiations. As long as he came, Li Tianlan would have to give him a result in the shortest time. I'm here. If I can't take him away, I'll kill you. How overbearing was this? Dongqing Wudi's face was livid. He held his mobile phone and seemed to be hesitating whether to call Li Huaqing to sound him out. He had a natural position, so if he called him, Emperor Dong's palace would inevitably be suspected of showing weakness. Li Huaqing had never communicated with Dongqing Wudi from beginning to end. Perhaps he, who was on the plane at this time, was waiting for Dongqing Wudi's call. As long as this call was made, he would know that Emperor Dong's palace was not confident. Let him come. Li Tianlan's essence, qi, and spirit seemed to completely condense in a very short silence. His voice revealed a kind of killing determination that could tear the world apart, and it was as hard as gold and iron. I'll wait here. Why do you have to do this? Dongqing Wudi frowned tightly and held his mobile phone, but he couldn't make the call. Maybe there is another way. There is indeed another way. Li Tianlan nodded. But I don't accept it. His expression and voice were getting calmer and calmer, almost deep. As long as I leave Emperor Dong's palace at this time, Li Huaqing can't do anything. Li Tianlan looked up at the night in the distance and said indifferently, but this is my territory. Why should I leave? Dongqing Wudi walked up to Li Tianlan. In his sight, he saw a trace of extremely fine but shocking scarlet blood in Li Tianlan's pupils. The wind swept through the night. The sword energy between heaven and earth was like a tide, mighty and mighty. The incomparably strong and even fierce fighting aura surged in Emperor Dong's palace. Li Tianlan's calm voice became a little hoarse, as if he was trying to suppress something. How dare he? Even if I dare to see him, I dare. Tianlan. Dongqing Wudi frowned. Li Tianlan didn't continue to speak out his rebellious thoughts in the eyes of others. He stopped speaking and seemed to calm down for a moment. The phone rang again. Dongqing Wudi took a deep look at Li Tianlan, picked up the phone and said in a deep voice, Qingzhao. Are you in Xinyuan City? Bai Qingzhao's voice on the other end of the phone was hurried and anxious. Yes. Dongqing Wudi said yes. I heard that Li Huaqing saw you not long ago. Do you know that he has gone to Xinyuan City now? What is he doing? What does he want to do? Is he forcing us to take a stand? Or is he forcing Tianlan to take a stand? Bai Qingzhao's exasperated voice sounded on the other end of the phone, sounding sharp and high-pitched. Now the whole upper class of Zhongzhou state knew that Li Guangtu had fallen into Li Tianlan's hands. Everyone knew Li Huaqing's attitude toward Li Guangtu. Everyone also knew that Dongqing Wudi was already in Xinyuan City. At this time, Li Huaqing suddenly rushed to Xinyuan City in person, which had imperceptibly made everyone in the whole parliament tense up, as if they were facing a formidable enemy. At this moment, with Yuzhou as the center, the suffocating sense of oppression was spreading over the whole Zhongzhou state as Li Huaqing approached. Every member of parliament was paying close attention to the development of the incident at this time. Qingzhao, don't worry. We'll deal with it when it comes. Dongqing Wudi said in a deep voice. Maybe there is another possibility. Bai Qingzhao fell silent for a while. After a full 5 minutes he said slowly, is it possible? Of course there was another possibility. That was, in the few hours after Li Huaqing and Dongqing Wudi parted, Li Huaqing had a new bargaining chip that could persuade Li Tianlan. And he was extremely confident in his bargaining chip. He was so confident that as long as he proposed it, Li Tianlan would never refuse. But was it possible? In just a few hours, a certain decision couldn't even be considered as careful consideration. And Li Huaqing had never been an impulsive person. The phone rang faintly in the phone. It seemed that Bai Qingzhao's phone rang again. Bai Qingzhao hesitated for a moment, but he did not hang up the phone. Instead he answered the phone with the other hand. Through the phone, a somewhat hurried and vague voice rang in Bai Qingzhao's ears and echoed in Dongqing Wudi's ears like thunder. Vaguely, the voice with a slight Qingzhou accent on the phone sounded familiar. It seemed to be the voice of a heavyweight in the supervisory department. Qingzhao, the third supervisory group has entered Jiangxia. Chapter 12:11. Was a surprise. Was a surprise. On the other end of the phone, the voice that was separated by two communication signals rang in Bai Qingzhao's ears, Dongqing Wudi's ears, and also fell into Li Tianlan's ears. The third supervisory group entered Jiangxia. It was hard to describe what he felt at this moment. It was as if a kind of extreme numbness and coldness rose in his body, along the spine, and hit the brain in an instant. All the pores on his body opened, and his hair stood on end. He didn't know whether it was anger or panic mixed together. His blood flowed wildly in his body, and the excited emotion roared to the high ground of reason. Dongqing Wudi clenched his teeth and his eyes were bloodshot. A thought kept roaring in his mind. How dare he? What did he want to do? The supervisory system of Zhongzhou state had lasted for hundreds of years. It could be said that it was a group of people that could make any feudal official or feudal lord feel as if they were facing a formidable enemy. The members of the supervisory group were not fixed, the time of supervision was not fixed, and the scope of supervision was not fixed. Under normal circumstances, the inspection team would only decide on the scope of inspection at the last minute if there was a major case that caught the attention of the parliament. Otherwise, although there was a fixed premise, the inspection team would usually give a routine notice before the operation after being authorized. There were very few cases of sudden attacks. As for the leader of the supervisory group and the scope of supervision, this kind of authorization was only in the hands of the president. And today, right now, when the new ranking list of the divine list swept the entire dark world, when Li Guangtu was captured by Li Tianlan, and when Li Huaqing decided to ask Emperor Dong's palace for people, the third supervisory group determined its scope of supervision and inspection. Jiangxia. At present, Jiangxia had not received the notice at all. There was no doubt that this was Li Huaqing's sudden attack. When the sense of oppression from the hidden Dragon Sea crossed thousands of miles and covered Tianan, the parliament's edge had directly shrouded Jiangxia. The third supervisory group went to Jiangxia. Li Huaqing drew his sword. Dongqing Wudi kept taking deep breaths several times. The feeling of numbness in his scalp was still there. But his eyes had completely calmed down. He didn't know whether this scene was a game or something else, but he saw Li Huaqing's toughness and Li Tianlan's uncompromising attitude. The whole Zhongzhou state seemed to be full of sabers and swords. The fierceness and bloodiness of the battle seemed to be assaulting their senses. Dongqing Wudi held the phone tightly and said lightly, "Who is the leader of the supervisory group?" "Wang Wei's team leader, Tong Yang's vice team leader." On the other end of the phone, it seemed that he didn't expect Dongqing Wudi to answer. After a pause he slowly spoke. Dongqing Wudi narrowed his eyes and remained silent. At this time, the person who was communicating with Bai Qingzhao was one of the backbone forces of the giant group, as well as the representative of all the forces of the giant group in the Ministry of Supervision. The fact that he could get the intelligence so accurately was enough to show his power in the Ministry of Supervision. Bai Qingzhao said something to the other party on the other side of the phone and then hung up. Bai Qingzhao was not angry. He seemed to have calmed down as well. He said quietly, "Should we do something?" "Of course. It's not our style to do nothing when they're already knocking on our door." Dongqing Wudi twitched the corner of his mouth and sneered. Wang Wei, Tong Yang. They were the current leader and deputy leader of the 3rd Inspectorate Group. Wang Wei was the former governor of Liaodong. He retired 2 years ago, but he had great prestige in the academics. Tong Yang was an inspector at the level of deputy governor of the Ministry of Supervision and was also one of the backbone forces of the academics. These two people served as the first and second leaders of the 3rd Inspectorate Group. Obviously, Li Huaqing had made up his mind to monopolize the results of the Inspectorate Group's inspection of Jiangxia. What was Jiangxia? Not only the parliament, but all the people in Zhongzhou state who knew that the new group was about to rise knew very well that Jiangxia was the core base camp of the new group. The new group had only risen for a short time, so the talent reserve was inevitably insufficient. Many of the territories that the new group conquered needed to be replaced by people from Jiangxia. At present, Speaker Ji Ankang of Jiangxia, Governor Dongqing Qiuqi, and even 5 or 6 provincial councillors of Jiangxia could be said to be popular figures after the election, especially Ji Ankang, who was the first secretary of Wu Jingmin, the current deputy prime minister of Zhongzhou state. He was a super capable man promoted by Wu Jingmin. After Zhou Yuanshan was transferred to Nanyue, he had been the speaker for just over 2 years, but now he had become the main figure promoted by the new group. After the election he was very likely to enter the parliament. If Li Tianlan could push him into the parliament, then the new group's layout in Zhongzhou state would be easier and more powerful. Headed by Ji Ankang, Dongqing Qiuqi, 5 or 6 provincial councillors of Jiangxia province, and even the first and second leaders of the local municipal governments were now people of concern. This was the power that the Li family had suppressed and accumulated for many years. They were the elites of the elites. Almost everyone had the ability to take on greater responsibilities. Whether they could go up a step and what position they could reach depended on the explosive power of the new group in the period before the election. This battle array could directly determine the scale and foundation of the new group. At this time, Li Huaqing let the 3rd supervisory group enter Jiangxia. There was no doubt that it was a drastic measure. This knife stabbed straight at Li Tianlan and the key points of the whole new group. Even if the supervisory group was nitpicking and found a little problem, Li Huaqing would have the possibility to completely magnify it. This could completely affect the explosive power of the new group at the last moment, completely suppress their future scale and the right to speak in Zhongzhou state. What the hell happened? When the list of the divine list came out, Dongqing Wudi originally thought that Li Huaqing would further increase his bargaining chip, but he did not expect that what he waited for was Li Huaqing's almost reckless suppression. What happened on Earth did not seem to matter anymore. What mattered was what he should do after Li Tianlan showed his attitude. Was this kind of suppression a warning to the giant group? A warning to Dongqing Wudi not to interfere in the affairs of the new group? Did he want to isolate Li Tianlan and the new group and make them feel more pressure? Dongqing Wudi sneered. After hanging up the phone with Bai Qingzhao, he quickly found Bai Qingqian's phone number and dialed it. At the same time in Yuzhou. After hanging up the phone, Bai Qingzhao walked out of the study and saw Bai Zhanfang sitting silently in the living room, drinking tea. What did Wudi say? Bai Zhanfang glanced at him and took the initiative to ask. He said that if we do nothing when others have come to fight, it's not our style. Bai Zhanfang said honestly. Bai Zhanfang was silent for a while, as if he was thinking about something carefully. After a while, he suddenly laughed and said, "In that case, let's do something." Bai Qingzhao was shocked, and the blood all over his body seemed to be completely boiling with his father's words. He took a deep breath, clenched his fists tightly and tentatively said, "Then, shall we wait for the signal from Liaodong?" Waiting for the signal from Liaodong was undoubtedly the best way to fight back against the third supervisory group. Bai Zhanfang smiled indifferently and said, "There's no need to be so troublesome. We old guys are still here. Why let the younger generation do it?" He lowered his eyelids and said lightly, "Your Uncle Zhou is already on his way." Chapter 12:12. When the melodious ringtone of the mobile phone rang again in the roaring rotors, Li Huaqing looked down at the mobile phone. The light on the mobile phone screen had dimmed slightly. The upper right corner of the screen showed that his mobile phone still had 17% battery. The beautiful land and rivers of Zhongzhou State were moving backward unhurriedly under the helicopter. Li Huaqing's eyes lit up for a moment, but the glimmer of light dimmed again when he saw the caller ID on the screen. His mobile phone kept ringing. Since he got on the helicopter, his mobile phone had been ringing. The strong wind brought by the helicopter whistled through the entire Zhongzhou State in the night. He went all the way south, leaving Yuzhou with an absolute sense of oppression, passing through Yan and Zhao, Zhongyuan, North Lake and South Lake and entering Xie. After replenishing in Xie, he rushed to Nanyun, Tiannan, Xinyuan City and Emperor Dong's palace. No one saw Li Huaqing's hesitation. Countless backbone of the academics, retired old people and then Hua Jinyang, Zhou Yunhai, Ji Wenzhang, Wan Qingyun, Yi Dongxing and even Wang Qinglei. Phone calls rang one after another. Sometimes when he was talking, there was already a notification tone that someone else was calling him. But the phone call he was most looking forward to never rang. He moved forward in silence. The other party responded with silence. Tiannan was getting closer and closer. Li Huaqing looked down at the phone screen that was still lit up and narrowed his eyes. It was Guo Wentian's phone call. Now he finally couldn't sit still anymore? He twitched the corner of his mouth, swiped the phone and answered the call. Guo Wentian on the other end of the phone did not speak for a while, as if he did not know what to say. Li Huaqing did not speak either, just waiting for Guo Wentian to speak. Guo Wentian's breathing became more and more obvious. His personal position, the position of the Prince Group, and his position in Zhongzhou State, each position was constantly contradictory to what he wanted to say and his attitude. From his breathing, Li Huaqing could clearly hear his constant struggle and entanglement. "Is it too urgent?" Guo Wentian was silent for nearly a minute before he whispered and asked hesitantly, "Are you afraid?" Li Huaqing laughed. His words were so blunt that they were a little harsh. Guo Wentian was not angry. Instead, he was silent for a long time and then he said slowly, "I don't know." Li Huaqing did not say anything. Guo Wentian continued, "I don't know if I'm afraid. I don't even know what I'm afraid of. Are you afraid? Are you afraid that he will kill me?" Li Huaqing's smile was obvious. "He has the guts," Guo Wentian said in a deep voice and then continued with a sigh, "At his age, it doesn't matter if he pierces the sky. He's so young and has this kind of strength, that's why there are restrictions." Li Huaqing said blandly, "I'm not afraid that he will kill me and we haven't reached that point yet. But I'm afraid that he will leave Zhongzhou State. This is not the result I want." Guo Wentian snorted unconsciously. Of course he was afraid of Li Tianlan leaving Zhongzhou State. The parliament was aggressive. If Li Tianlan really fell out with Zhongzhou State out of anger, Guo Wentian could be sure that he would not survive, not to mention what would happen to Li Huaqing. This was the absolute dominance of extreme personal force. As the number one on the divine list from Zhongzhou State, if he was forced to leave Zhongzhou State, the anger and hatred in his heart could make Li Tianlan do anything in his extreme thoughts. No one in the whole Zhongzhou State could stop Li Tianlan's assassination. This was probably the way to perish together with him. Because if Li Tianlan really did this, no country in the world would dare to accept him, and his end was already doomed. Guo Wentian silently thought about all kinds of possibilities, and finally said in a low voice, "You are playing with fire. On the contrary, this is the safest way to do it," Li Huaqing said blandly. There was a harsh sound from the phone, and there was only 10% battery left. Li Huaqing sighed softly. "You still don't understand." He didn't explain anything and silently hung up the phone. Perhaps the whole Zhongzhou State now thought that he was playing with fire, but the safest way was actually his way now. The supervisory group's entry into Jiangzhou was just the first step. If Li Tianlan didn't agree to hand over Li Guangtu, more obvious and stronger suppression would follow tomorrow morning. Li Huaqing would not go easy on him. This time he would try his best to suppress the living space of Emperor Dong's palace at all levels. This was not to force Li Tianlan to leave Zhongzhou state. On the contrary, it was to better keep him in Zhongzhou state. So Li Huaqing came in person. In the stormy suppression, Li Huaqing sent himself to Li Tianlan. From an objective point of view, it was equivalent to giving his life to Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing was very sure that as long as he was still in Emperor Dong's palace, no matter how fierce the parliament's next move was, Li Tianlan would not really leave Zhongzhou state. The reason? The reason was that he was still by Li Tianlan's side. It was so simple but not simple. As long as he was in Emperor Dong's palace, this was the biggest leeway. It seemed that all kinds of means to fall out with him were just the parliament showing its strength. The parliament also had to show its strength. Not everything could be negotiated. Li Huaqing was very clear about this. Perhaps Li Tianlan himself didn't know how terrible the consequences would be after mastering such strength and power at his age, and how serious the disaster might be to Zhongzhou state if there were no corresponding restrictions. Youth represented unlimited potential. When Li Tianlan had fulfilled his potential, his youth represented immaturity, a dangerous mindset that wandered outside the rules at any time. This was unacceptable to Li Huaqing. So in any case he had to find a strong opponent for Li Tianlan. Even if this opponent would fail, it didn't matter because it would take time. During this time, Li Tianlan would really mature and understand what he should do. Li Huaqing silently glanced at the phone. On the phone call from Dongqing Wudi or Li Tianlan that he had been expecting never rang. Even from the beginning to the present, he had never received any call from the new group or the giant group. Li Huaqing's eyes gradually became dignified. In the unusual silence, he clearly smelled a touch of fighting and gunpowder. The helicopter flew over Nanyuan and the first city in Tianan. The brightly lit Xinyuan city was close at hand. "President, we will arrive at Emperor Dong's palace soon." Ma Si sat opposite Li Huaqing and said in a serious and dignified voice. Li Huaqing took a last look at the phone, said yes and closed his eyes. The plane flew over the lights of Xinyuan city. Ma Si stood up and planned to go to the cockpit to say something to the pilot. At the same time, on the soft lawn of Emperor Dong's palace, Li Tianlan, who stood with Dongqing Wudi but rarely spoke, raised his head and glanced at the night sky in the distance. At this moment, the sound of the helicopter's rotors had not yet come from afar. Emperor Dong's palace was quiet in the night. Li Tianlan raised one hand to the night where only the signal lights were flashing in the distance. Boom! In an instant, with Li Tianlan as the center, the world suddenly twisted. The surging and incredible sword energy surged, and the sharp sword intent was completely boiling. The world was torn apart in an instant, and the whole night was completely replaced by sword energy. Like a vast ocean, the sword energy stirred the night tens of thousands of meters away in an instant along the direction where Li Tianlan raised his hand. The sharp sword energy spread noisily. The helicopter that had just entered the sky above Xinyuan city was out of control instantly. The rotating rotors were silently cut into pieces by the sword energy. The helicopter flying in the air suddenly spun and rolled in the air, smashing into the lights on the ground. Li Tianlan raised his hand and closed it slightly. The sword energy all over the sky vibrated at the same time. The falling helicopter seemed to be gripped by an invisible hand at this moment. With the overwhelming sword energy, the helicopter was directly pulled by the invisible hand and rushed into Emperor Dong's palace at an unimaginable speed. The cabin was spinning. Li Huaqing's face was abnormally ruddy. Ma Si fell in the corner with a broken head and a desperate look on his face. The endless sword energy pulled the helicopter from the edge of Xinyuan city all the way to Li Tianlan. The helicopter crashed to the ground, and the huge fuselage slid out of control on the lawn, leaving a deep mark hundreds of meters long. The solid landing gear and the glass in the cabin were completely shattered. Dense cracks appeared on the black fuselage, which had originally looked very majestic, under the wrath of the sword chi. The ridiculously broken helicopter slid all the way and stopped less than 5 meters away from Li Tianlan. With a dull sound, the heavy cabin door of the helicopter fell to the ground, splashing a cloud of smoke and dust. Li Tianlan squinted and looked at Li Huaqing in the cabin, who was facing him motionlessly because of the seat belt. He said expressionlessly, "You're too slow. I'll give you a hand. Welcome to Xinyuan City. Welcome to Emperor Dong's palace." Chapter 12-13. The wind under the curtain of night had completely frozen. In the extreme silence, only the cracks on the helicopter were emitting light sounds and spreading. The sword chi was silent, but it was everywhere. Fine and sharp, it moved around the helicopter from the cockpit to the fuselage and then to the tail. More and more cracks appeared. It was as if a pale white flower had suddenly bloomed on the pitch-black fuselage of the helicopter. Irregular patterns were quietly spreading, as if to surround the entire huge fuselage. Dizziness, anger, helplessness, solemnity. All kinds of emotions and perceptions kept tumbling in Li Huaqing's heart. His body seemed to be immersed in the dizziness of the helicopter out of control and rolling in the air. At that moment, the world was spinning, and death seemed to have shown a grim sneer in the night outside the cabin. The majestic sword energy wrapped the helicopter and kept accelerating, dragging them to Emperor Dong's palace, as if death was mercilessly pulling them into hell. At that moment, what Li Huaqing felt was not fear, but a sense of weightlessness that was completely beyond his control. The helicopter's engine seemed to be barely able to maintain stability, but that kind of power was too fragile under the sword energy. All the stability was completely destroyed in an instant. The sword energy surrounded and pulled him, and the seat belt that held his body in place tightened to the limit. After the world spun around him, his body leaned forward crazily under the violent pull. The bulletproof glass of the cabin was shattered by the sword energy, and the warm night wind of Tianan poured into the cabin violently under the absolute acceleration, bringing with it an indescribable coldness. This feeling would never be forgotten. If this was a show of strength, then it could only be said that this show of strength was really powerful. He was showing the power of Zhongzhou state to Li Tianlan. And now, Li Tianlan was also showing his own power to him. He heard Li Tianlan's emotionless voice and felt the omnipresent sharpness in Emperor Dong's palace. The sharp sharpness covered the sky and the earth. It was so sharp that it was almost fearless and directly pressed against his heart. Phew, Li Huaqing let out a long breath. Li Tianlan stood outside the cabin, motionless like a statue, looking at him with no expression. Li Huaqing took a deep look at him, unfastened the seat belt, walked to the corner of the cabin and pulled Ma Si up. Ma Si had fallen into a coma. When the helicopter lost control, Ma Si unbuckled her seat belt and stood up. The out-of-control helicopter tumbled in the air. Caught off guard, Ma Si's body also lost control and crashed into the metal door in front of the cockpit. He instinctively grabbed the nearest handrail, but as the sword chi pulled the helicopter, the sudden acceleration directly threw Ma Si to the other side of the cabin. Under the huge impact, the top secret of Zhongzhou state directly fainted. Li Huaqing pulled up his secretary with some difficulty. Before he could drag Ma Si out of the cabin, Dongqing Wudi had already walked in first. "Leave it to me. I'll treat his wound." Dongqing Wudi smiled and lifted Ma Si with great ease. Then he went to the cockpit, picked up the driver who was also unconscious, and looked at Li Huaqing. Li Huaqing pondered for a moment and nodded. He knew very well that at this time, no matter where Dongqing Wudi stood, he did not want to stay between him and Li Tianlan. This was also acceptable for him and Li Tianlan. Without Dongqing Wudi here, Li Huaqing, who faced Li Tianlan alone, would feel more pressure. And precisely because of his absence, Li Huaqing was also more likely to have a deeper talk with Li Tianlan. Li Huaqing quickly left the scene with the two wounded. Li Huaqing sat in the broken cabin for a while. When the dizziness in his mind almost disappeared, he took a deep breath and walked out of the cabin. The helicopter will be towed away to check the fault. Fortunately, if it hadn't broken down near Emperor Dong's palace, the consequences would have been unpredictable. Li Tianlan said lightly. "Fault?" Li Huaqing's eyes narrowed and he said with a smile, "So, I should thank you for saving my life?" "You're welcome." Li Tianlan was still expressionless. Li Huaqing smiled. He was very curious as to why he could smile now. All his actions since he came to the stage seemed very gentle. But gentleness did not mean that he had no temper, nor did it mean that he would appear to be weak. In fact, in the hearts of many people, the gentle and calm Li Huaqing was far more deterrent than the other counselors who banged the table and roared. But at this moment, Li Huaqing was really not angry. Even if the young man in front of him attacked him, destroyed a helicopter, and even made him and his secretary extremely embarrassed, his heart was calm. Maybe it was because he valued him too much, and in his heart he also had too many expectations for him? Li Huaqing never knew that he would value a person so much and be optimistic about his future. Even though the two of them were now on opposite sides. The third supervisory group's entry into Jiangxia is just the beginning. Li Huaqing said, "In the next few months, the 1st to the 10th supervisory groups will be sent out one after another. The inspection scope is very large, including Wuyue, Liaodong, Beihai, Nanyue, Southwest and Northern City. This is the normal inspection tour before the election. Jiangzhou is just the first stop. This time, the third supervisory group's inspection scope is Jiangzhou, Jianghuai and Huading. I believe you really? Li Tianlan nodded lightly and his tone was a little careless. He did believe what Li Huaqing said, but it did not mean that the third supervisory group had no other purpose in entering Jiangzhou. Whether they had other purposes or not, Li Huaqing's words stood. Li Huaqing turned his head to look at Li Tianlan and suddenly laughed. He reached out and pointed at Li Tianlan. You boy, I know you have emotions, so when I just came to Emperor Dong's palace, you gave me a show of strength. What? Or are you unhappy? Do you want to beat me to vent your anger? Li Tianlan turned his head to look at Li Huaqing, and the corner of his mouth twitched symbolically. I can understand your emotions and even understand what you think of me now. But in my current position I have things I should do. I don't have emotions, Li Tianlan said lightly, but there is one thing that needs to be clarified. You came at the wrong time. At this time, it is difficult for Emperor Dong's palace to really welcome you. What? Li Huaqing smiled casually. Next, I will deal with some internal affairs that belong to our Li family, or the family affairs of the Li family. This is our own business and we will not welcome anyone who wants to intervene. How do you know that I am going to intervene in this matter? Li Huaqing was calm. Li Tianlan did not answer him but smiled casually and said, It's best that you are not. Maybe I misunderstood. He paused and continued, but many people seem to be very interested in the family affairs of the Li family. Maybe you don't want to intervene, but others seem to be ready to intervene. He looked at Li Huaqing and suddenly laughed. I'm going to stay in Xinyuan City during this period of time. I'd like to see exactly what kind of things dare to extend their claws towards me and interfere in my family's affairs. If I really see them, I'll chop them into pieces. I think you won't mind, right? Li Huaqing stopped laughing. He looked at Li Tianlan and narrowed his eyes. Li Tianlan was also looking at him. The two of them stared at each other. They were expressionless. Chapter 12-14. It was 3 o'clock at night. The sudden ringtone of the cell phone rang in the quiet bedroom, dispelling the gentle dream in the warm bedroom. The desk lamp lit up almost as soon as the cell phone rang. Zhao Changjiang, who was in pajamas, took the cell phone and looked at the number. His originally vigilant and solemn face changed dramatically. It seemed that he was very scared. He answered the phone without hesitation and said in a deep voice, Speaker. Because of his profession, he often received sudden calls in the middle of the night. It might be from the ministry or it might be from some subordinates who were close to him, or it might be some serious case or something else. But he never thought that he would receive a call from his immediate superior at this time. The remaining sleepiness disappeared the moment he answered the phone. Zhao Changjiang, who was completely awake, had already reached out to find his clothes. Old Li, come to my place for a short meeting. On the phone, the steady and graceful female voice laughed. Am I disturbing your rest? Zhao Changjiang's heart relaxed a little with the laughter on the phone. He also laughed. I'm used to it. But I was really shocked when I received your call. There are some things that need to be dealt with urgently. Let's talk face to face later. The other party said lightly and then hung up the phone. Zhao Changjiang began to put on his clothes quickly. Just like when he suddenly heard the whistle for emergency assembly in the middle of the night in the army, he was serious, hurried, meticulous, and resolute. What's wrong? Beside Zhao Changjiang, the woman who was nearly 50 years old but still attractive asked a little lazily. She raised her hand to rub her eyes and complained, What's wrong this time? There are really too many troubles in the local area. Tell me, when have you been free from worry in the past few years? You're so busy that you don't eat regularly. You're on tenterhooks even when you sleep. I'm almost suffering from a nervous breakdown because of you. The speaker called me personally and said that he wants to have an emergency meeting. Zhao Changjiang shook his head and said gently, Go to sleep first. It's all right. Cousin called you? At this time? The woman's sleepiness and laziness faded away in an instant. She suddenly sat up in bed. What happened? I'm not sure yet. Zhao Changjiang shook his head. He didn't say it in his heart, but he was almost certain that Speaker Bai, who had never made any big moves since he came to Liaodong, was going to do something big this time. The woman's expression was a little uncertain. Her name was Zhao Qing, a distant relative of the Bai family in Yuzhou. In terms of relationship, she should call Bai Qingqian cousin, but in fact, the blood relationship between them was very thin, the kind that could not be more distant. Although they were distant relatives, Zhao Qing had been very close to Bai Qingqian since they were young. Although they were relatives in name, they could be said to be best friends who could talk about anything. Zhao Changjiang and Zhao Qing were even married. They were all introduced by Bai Qingqian back then. At that time, Zhao Zhang was transferred from the Southern Station District to Liaodong. In addition to the fact that Bai Qingqian really needed a trusted confidant to be her right-hand man, Bai Qingqian also wanted to chat with her good friend for a long time. Zhao Changjiang was one of the 11 provincial council members of Liaodong province and the head of the Liaodong police department. It was no exaggeration to say that he was Bai Qingqian's right-hand man in Liaodong. Although Bai Qingqian came to Liaodong because of the cooperation between the two groups, she did not stand on ceremony when it came to consolidating her right to speak. For nearly 5 years the overall level of Liaodong seemed to be extremely stable, but Bai Qingqian had long been in power. Her words carried enormous weight, and she quietly overshadowed the sharpness of the governor of Liaodong. The main reason was that she had grasped what she should control in her hands. The Ministry of Personnel, which controlled personnel, was the first thing she grasped, followed by the Ministry of Supervision, and then the propaganda system. Finally, she transferred Zhao Changjiang to control the police department, plus the chief steward of the provincial government, who was bound to keep pace with Bai Qingqian. After mastering 4 powerful departments, Bai Qingqian had already established an absolute advantage in Liaodong. In less than 5 years, Bai Qingqian was almost unshakable in Liaodong. There was no doubt that if she did not leave in this election, the whole Liaodong would be included in the territory of the giant group or the new group. This was undoubtedly what the academics absolutely did not want to see. This was one of their most core territories. As the election approached, the ups and downs of Bai Qingqian's sprint to the parliament made the whole Liaodong turbulent in recent days. All kinds of signs had appeared a few months ago. At this time, in the middle of the night, Bai Qingqian suddenly called for an emergency meeting. Zhao Changjiang could hardly imagine the content of this meeting. "You sleep first. I'm going." Zhao Changjiang looked at his wife on the bed, whose expression changed. He took a deep breath and went straight out of his room. He lived in the 6th building of the provincial government compound, not far from the 1st building where Bai Qingqian lived. Zhao Changjiang put on his coat and went out. It was cold in winter in Liaodong. The courtyard was silvery white and it was snowing heavily again. Zhao Changjiang stepped on the snowflakes and walked in the courtyard of the provincial government compound in the middle of the night. His eyes were firm. Many years ago he was injured in the Border Control Corps and transferred to the military headquarters. From the military headquarters, he entered the Southern Station District and then transferred from the military system to Liaodong. His style had never changed. He was calm, firm, and fearless. After more than 4 years in Liaodong, Zhao Changjiang had already established his image as an iron-fisted person. Zhao Changjiang passed by the 4th building of the provincial government compound. The door of the detached villa in the 4th building was just opened. A slightly fat woman in her 50s just wrapped her coat tightly and came out. When she saw Zhao Changjiang, she was slightly stunned. "Old Li?" Zhao Changjiang was also a little surprised. "The 1st building?" "Yes, boss. Bai summoned me in the middle of the night. I dare not neglect it." The middle-aged woman chuckled. Her figure was slightly plump and her face was round. In the midst of the falling snow, she looked somewhat benevolent. This was another trusted general of Bai Qingqian who had come from Qinzhou province. She followed Bai Qingqian all the way to Liaodong, the Iron Lady. When Bai Qingqian was the governor of Qinzhou, she served as the non-director deputy governor of Qinzhou. Now she was one of the 11 directors of Liaodong and in charge of the Ministry of Supervision. Compared with Zhao Changjiang, who was an iron-fisted person, Guan Yuan in the system of Liaodong was obviously more afraid of this seemingly amiable little old woman. "Let's go together." Zhao Changjiang nodded. "Yesterday, Ningning and Haoyang wandered outside for a day and had dinner here. The 2 children said that they wanted to travel abroad to see the world. Old Li Haoyang said that he didn't plan to take over your job in the future, nor did he want to be a policeman. After graduation he planned to do business. This trip abroad seems to be to investigate some project. What's your attitude?" Yi Han, who was known as the Iron Lady in Liaodong, looked at Zhao Changjiang with a smile. Her daughter and Zhao Changjiang's son both went to school in Huading, and they were in the same school in the same year. The 2 children had been in love for 2 years and had a very good relationship. It was only a matter of time that the 2 families would get married. They often visited each other and their parents were also very supportive of them being together. "That brat still hasn't told me about it. Looks like your mother-in-law found out first." Zhao Changjiang was a little stunned and his tone was a little unhappy. My old Han intends to give the two children a startup capital and even plans to send someone to accompany them abroad, but it depends on your attitude. Yi Han chuckled. Let them be. Zhao Changjiang shook his head. I don't care about this. You can discuss it with Zhao Qing. The two children will graduate this year, right? At this time next year, I'm afraid that you and I will not be in Liaodong. It may not be convenient to meet in the future. In my opinion, we should settle their relationship this year. Ningning is a good child. Once she enters my family, I promise I won't treat her badly. Okay. Yi Han's voice was very happy. My old Han also means the same. Ask the two children what they say. If there is no problem, try to let them get married after graduation. The two chatted casually, but their voices gradually lowered. In their sight, the third and seventh buildings of the provincial government compound lit up one after another. Zhao Changjiang and Yi Han looked at each other and both of them were silent. Everyone knew what kind of people lived in the third and seventh buildings of the provincial government compound. They could be said to be comrades who advanced and retreated with them. The one who lived in the seventh building controlled the propaganda system of Liaodong and was Bai Qingqian's college classmate. The one in the third building controlled the Ministry of Personnel of Liaodong. He was transferred from Yuzhou at that time because the Bai family directly supported Bai Qingqian. Plus Zhao Changjiang and Yi Han. This was the perception of outsiders. Bai Qingqian was one of the four heavenly kings in Liaodong. In the middle of the night, Bai Qingqian actually informed the four of them at once. What did this mean? Liaodong. Yi Han sighed in a low voice. Is the most chaotic situation going to start in Liaodong this time? Chapter 12:15. The thick material turned to the last page. Under the soft light, Bai Qingqian put the material aside, picked up the teacup and took a sip of water. She looked calm. This material had been sent to her office a few months ago. At that time, Bai Qingqian read it over and over again several times. Finally, because she didn't make up her mind, she temporarily sealed it up. The material involved a series of events such as the corridor transformation project of the Liaodong provincial government, as well as a large number of illegal trade in Anong. The target was Tan Xiaotian, the current deputy speaker of Fengtian Academy. There were more than 100,000 words of a large number of reports. Obviously, it was not written by one person but from many aspects. The time span was as long as 5 years. Although there was no real name, a large number of reports were indeed true. To a certain extent, it could even be said that the evidence was conclusive. Even Bai Qingqian had an impression of many things mentioned in the material. This material appeared in her hands about 3 months ago. The source was still unknown. It was obvious that the election was coming. Because the election was coming, this was a spark sent to her by some people who wanted to fish in troubled waters. However, Bai Qingqian had never acted rashly. After reading the material in detail, she had already begun to let Yi Han's Ministry of Supervision take action secretly. Now she had also grasped a lot of breakthrough clues. Some of Tan Xiaoyan's practices had been arrogant to the point of brazen. The secret investigation of the Ministry of Supervision did not even encounter any even symbolic resistance. Some vague evidence had already appeared in the hands of the Ministry of Supervision. So 2 months ago, the provincial government personally issued a notice that Tan Xiaotian was sent to the Jingji Academy in Liaodong to enter the advanced course. Then he began a half-year-long advanced course. When the news came out, there was no panic in Liaodong. Instead, there was jubilation. The Jingji Academy in Zhongzhou State was the fundamental and important place of the academics. Its importance was even above that of Liaodong. There were quite a number of super heavyweights in the academics, including Li Huaqing, who had the background of the academy. Because of this, they were jokingly called the academics by the outside world. Specifically in Liaodong, the academy was obviously also a place where it was difficult for Bai Qingqian to influence. Tan Xiaotian had entered the academy's advanced class and not the training class. This was usually a sign that he was going to be promoted. In the past 2 years, the situation in Zhongzhou State seemed to be stable. But as the election got closer and closer, undercurrents were surging not only in Liaodong, but also in all provinces. When Bai Qingqian first entered Liaodong, she had already hurt the nerves of some people in Liaodong. In the past few years when she came to Liaodong, under this seemingly harmonious situation, there had been a lot of conflicts. Among them, Tan Xiaotian could be said to be a representative person. If Tan Xiaotian was transferred from the position of Deputy Speaker of Anong Province to the position of Deputy Speaker of Fengtian Provincial Government was Bai Qingqian's concession, Then letting Tan Xiaotian enter the advanced course was undoubtedly Bai Qingqian's preparation for leaving Liaodong province. In a sense, this seemed to be a sign that the academics had begun to exert their power and was ready to set things right in Liaodong. Tan Xiaotian entered the advanced class. Half a year later was basically very close to the time of the election. And the election in Liaodong province might be before or after the election in Zhongzhou state. This time sequence determined whether Bai Qingqian could stay in Liaodong for a year or more than half a year. Therefore, now the academics in Liaodong were strongly supporting the election in Liaodong province to be held before the election in Zhongzhou state. Tan Xiaotian entering the advanced class was a signal. When he returned from the academy and symbolically stayed in this position for a few days, it was very likely that he would be promoted from deputy speaker to one of the directors of Liaodong province, the speaker of Fengtian province, and become the new representative figure of the academy in Liaodong province. This was undoubtedly the best choice. In recent decades, several speakers of Fengtian province had directly ascended to the position of governor of Liaodong province. Many people hoped that Tan Xiaotian could seize this clear line between heaven and earth. To say the least, even if he couldn't seize it, after the advanced class, Tan Xiaotian was likely to directly serve as the deputy governor of Liaodong province, enter the council, and become the third person in the provincial government. This kind of rumor was getting clearer and clearer now. Obviously, the academics had begun to focus on the ecology of Liaodong province after Bai Qingqian left. Bai Qingqian would be elected as a member of parliament of Zhongzhou state in this election. After he left Liaodong province, the new speaker of Liaodong province would also be elected as a member of parliament of Zhongzhou state under the influence of Bai Qingqian and the power support of the academics, and he would take charge of Liaodong province. This person must be an important figure of the academics. In this way, the promotion channel of the academics was preliminarily perfected. As Bai Qingqian took the new post, the 4 supermasters under him would inevitably leave here one by one and go to different places. From the bottom of her heart, because the cooperation with the academics in recent years was quite pleasant, Bai Qingqian did not intend to make a big earthquake before she left. After all, she was still the speaker of Liaodong province. She was responsible for anything that happened in Liaodong province. That was why she temporarily hung Tan Xiaotian up. After he left, she would hand this problem to her successor. The successor must be one of the leaders of the academics and would know how to deal with the internal affairs of Liaodong province in a low-key manner. This way, even if she left this place, she wouldn't lose too many points. However, it was obvious that her careful consideration to some extent was regarded as weakness by some people with ulterior motives in Liaodong. Therefore, these days the internal affairs of Liaodong became more and more unstable. Bai Qingqian was still hesitating. But the matter of the third supervisory group entering Jiangzhou directly stimulated Bai Qingqian to make up her mind completely. The other party had already begun to take action against the new group and Li Tianlan. Bai Qingqian naturally would not be polite. She had a card in her hand and did not bother to wait for the signal from Yuzhou from Bai Zhanfeng and Zhou Mulin. At this moment, before leaving the academics, she just wanted to lift this shameful cover and see how much shocking darkness was brewing inside. Now that she had shed all pretense of cordiality, Bai Qingqian did not mind giving everyone in the academics a hard slap in the face. Bai Qingqian took another sip of tea, and her eyes became more indifferent and determined. Speaker Minister Yi is here. The secretary knocked lightly on the door, walked in and whispered, "Invite her in." Bai Qingqian nodded. Yi Han, who was slightly fat, came over and said with a smile, "Those guys are still outside. They said they wanted to smoke before coming in." Bai Qingqian nodded and asked directly, "Can we do it directly about Tan Xiaotian's problem?" Yi Han's face changed slightly. Obviously, she did not expect Bai Qingqian to be so direct. She hesitated and whispered, "Are you sure? If we can do it, let's do it." Bai Qingqian waved her hand lightly. "When Changjiang and the others come in, we will discuss the result together. It's time for some people to wake up." Yi Han took a deep breath and did not speak. Bai Qingqian held the teacup with a calm face. She thought of the leader and deputy leader of the third supervisory group. She thought of what they would do after entering Jiangzhou. Bai Qingqian gently raised the corner of her mouth. She was calm and confident, with indescribable grace. She did not have so many thoughts. She had only one thought now. Who dared to make life difficult for her son? She would let them die a horrible death. Chapter 12:16. Li Huaqing didn't see Li Guangtu in the end. He didn't even know Li Guangtu's current state from Li Tianlan. He just knew that Li Guangtu was still alive. Angry? Annoyed? Resentful? More or less, these emotions existed in his heart, but more than that, it was a kind of calmness that was expected. Before coming to Emperor Dong's palace, he had expected the current situation, so he was not surprised. If Li Tianlan was really so easy to talk to, the whole Zhongzhou state would not be in a sensitive state of anxiety now. Obviously, this matter could not be solved in a day or two. In the end, it still depended on fists and strength. Dongqing Wudi guessed that Li Huaqing came here in such a hurry because he had a trump card. Not only Dongqing Wudi. Because everyone else, based on their understanding of Li Huaqing, felt that he had a trump card. In the past 10 years, Li Huaqing had been gentle and occasionally strong. But no matter what he did, he would not make things unmanageable in the end. His steadiness made the whole Zhongzhou state trust him for 10 years, and this time seemed to be no exception. Li Huaqing did have a trump card. It was the kind of trump card that could immediately reach an agreement with Li Tianlan and could definitely make Li Tianlan compromise and let him go. With this trump card, he was 100% sure that he could persuade Li Tianlan. Even without persuasion, Li Tianlan could compromise. But that was not the way to play cards. If the so-called negotiation was destined to be unconditionally compromised all the time, it was not a negotiation but a plunder. There was more than one way to get Li Kuang to back. If the hard way didn't work, he could use the soft way. Li Huaqing fully believed that as long as he unconditionally compromised, satisfied Li Tianlan's demand, and allowed Emperor Dong's palace to plunder a considerable part of the various resources of Zhongzhou state, he could take Li Kuangtu away at any time. But Zhongzhou state was not a logistics base that could be plundered by Li Tianlan. Negotiation, game, dispute, confrontation. Li Huaqing had to take him away. But before letting Li Tianlan see his trump card, Li Huaqing had to let Li Tianlan see his own strength first. This was the case on any occasion. Only when one side showed their strength first could they be qualified to talk on equal terms. He had to let Li Tianlan realize that the attitude of Zhongzhou state was not inferior. Zhongzhou state could give benefits to Emperor Dong's palace, but it could also completely destroy the system of Emperor Dong's palace. Perhaps Li Tianlan knew this. But being able to do it and daring to do it were two completely different things. What Li Huaqing wanted to show was the power that could destroy Emperor Dong's palace at any time. To put it simply, he wanted to show off a few of his abilities. After that, when the situation became stable again, Li Tianlan might become more mature in reflection. This was a battle of attrition. It was a battle and game between Li Tianlan and Li Huaqing. The focus of the game was Li Kuangtu. The bargaining chips were the resources of Emperor Dong's palace and the academics. As the election approached, a storm was brewing. Li Huaqing, who was confirmed to be re-elected, and the entire academics should have been the most quiet group, but now the academics had become the first group to jump out. For Li Kuangtu? Li Huaqing didn't think so. He was indeed the focus of the dispute between him and Emperor Dong's palace. But whether it was to protect Gu Xingyun, Li Kuangtu, or to accept Jiang Shangyu, Li Huaqing was very clear-headed from beginning to end. He had only one goal. Not for Gu Xingyun, Li Kuangtu, and Jiang Shangyu. It was for Li Tianlan. Just for Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan was very polite to him, but also very impolite. The direct result of the disagreement was that Li Tianlan directly left. He was really leaving. Li Huaqing didn't even see Li Tianlan leave. After saying those harsh words, Li Tianlan just turned around and disappeared from his sight. The president, who was left alone in Emperor Dong's palace, stood alone and smoked a cigarette. Then he saw Xiao Mahai, who was now the chief butler of Emperor Dong's palace, walking over with a smile. They didn't talk about the old days. They were not familiar with each other. The general, who had blatantly embezzled tens of millions of prison funds in the past 2 years, had formally submitted his resignation a month ago. Li Huaqing also signed the resignation letter. Someone had taken over Xiao Mahai's position as the director of Emperor Dong's palace. Xiao Mahai, who had left the desert, went to Tiannan and became the director of Emperor Dong's palace. He seemed to be living a good life. Xiao Mahai arranged for Li Huaqing to stay in a villa in the central area of Emperor Dong's palace. The villa complex, which would probably be provided for the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace in the future, had just been completed. There was still a slight smell in the villa, but the decoration was absolutely comfortable and luxurious. Xiao Mahai arranged for people to prepare a sumptuous meal for breakfast or supper at this time. He even opened a bottle of wine and then left. Li Huaqing, who was not sleepy at all, sank his body into the soft leather sofa and slowly tasted the wine. He was not sleepy at all. He was a little excited inside. It was like the moment when he was about to draw the sword before the decisive battle. He was completely focused, energetic and highly focused. All the fatigue was completely suppressed and disappeared without a trace. Li Huaqing seemed to have completely entered the fighting state. He had already made sufficient mental preparations for this game. It could be victory, failure, or inevitable losses. All of these were within the range of what he could accept. He held the power in his hand, and this power had completely locked on the target. He could not hesitate, and must completely vent it out. He just didn't know if Li Tianlan had already made the same preparation. Li Huaqing held the wine glass and looked at the deep night outside the window, like a peerless swordsman holding a famous sword, waiting for the dawn. Li Tianlan did not rest either. He returned to the top floor of the castle where only he lived. In the spacious and luxurious living room, the maid Mai Shiranui, who came from East Island with all kinds of thoughts, had not left yet. She sat quietly on the sofa and was in a daze. She had changed out of her sexy and revealing clothes. She was wearing a pure white exquisite dress, black stockings and a pair of seductive red stilettos. She sat quietly in the spotless living room. Her legs, which were shimmering in black stockings, were crossed. She was elegant and quiet. Rather than a maid, she was more like a well-dressed imperial concubine waiting for the arrival of the emperor, or a princess looking forward to the arrival of her lover. She seemed to be thinking about something, so she did not come to her senses when Li Tianlan suddenly appeared in the room. She was thinking about her life and the future. Mai Shiranui had never denied her desire for power. This desire included many things such as the fanatical worship of real power, the power to dominate the dark world, the power to rule the world and sweep everything and so on. She had always had a goal in her life. When many so-called young talents in the dark world of East Island worshipped her as a goddess, those people never existed in her eyes. At the beginning, her master Shinichi Miyamoto, the supreme ninja of the invincible realm who supported Liuhua Palace and made it as famous as Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School, was incomparably lofty in her heart. At that time, the only thing Mai Shiranui wanted was to inherit everything from her master and lead Liuhua Palace to surpass Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace to become a super force in the dark world. After Shinichi Miyamoto died in the hands of tribulation, her target became Li Kuangtu. The Purgatory of Heaven capital appeared in East Island. At that time, the man with the code name God, holding a death scythe, was quiet and almost invisible most of the time, but he could fight tit for tat with Sword Emperor Wang Tianzong without falling behind. He indeed had the glory that shone on the whole dark world. Mai Shiranui didn't want to admit it, but she knew very well that in the most glorious years of the Purgatory of Heaven capital in East Island, she had many sleepless nights because of Li Kuangtu. His almost desperate power became something she was crazy about and also the driving force for her continuous progress. She longed to be conquered by such a man and to be owned by such a man. Appearance? None of these things mattered to her. When she tossed and turned countless nights, she could even disdain the pursuit of the royal crown prince. At that time, there was only the incomparable power in her eyes. She dreamed of becoming Li Kuangtu's woman, sleeping beside him, wearing Li Kuangtu's invincible aura, and enjoying the awe of the whole dark world. Mai Shiranui could see that Li Kuangtu was tempted by her. Many times she could feel the rising temperature in Li Kuangtu's eyes. However, whether it was the royal prince who accompanied Li Kuangtu or Phoenix of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, they all regarded her as a great threat and guarded her so tightly that there was no suitable opportunity. Li Kuangtu was indeed lustful, but he was not the kind of person who was desperate. If he didn't have the chance to eat her, he wouldn't force her. That was the most glorious years of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. Now it seemed that it was also the peak period of the Purgatory of Heaven capital. After the chaos in Snow Country, the Purgatory of Heaven capital began to fall from the peak at a speed that no one expected. Wang Tianzong's breakthrough completely suppressed the powerful aura on Li Kuangtu. The Purgatory of Heaven capital left East Island. Countless forces in the dark world were withering. Emperor Dong's palace rose strongly. During that time, Mai Shiranui was lost and confused. The support for the Purgatory of Heaven capital and the account to East Island pressed her hard at that time. She didn't know who to rely on and completely lost her goal. Until the end, she found that she could only rely on her own strength. So Liuhua Palace quietly cut off the relationship with the Purgatory of Heaven capital. The invincible image of Li Kuangtu that was once deeply rooted in her heart had collapsed. So when she did this, she found that she actually had no burden in her heart. She drew a clear line with the Purgatory of Heaven capital and even quietly swallowed a lot of the benefits that belonged to the Purgatory of Heaven capital. She benefited from both the purgatory of Heaven Capital and East Island. Liuhua Palace was getting stronger and stronger, and her personal strength was constantly breaking through. She thought that she had seen the future that she once looked forward to approaching, and she saw the light of hope coming from a distant place. Then the shadow that spread from Zhongzhou State quietly spread to East Island. There was no sign. It was natural, like the sun rising and the moon setting. The world was supposed to be like this. The shadow spread in Zhongzhou State. It was dark and silent, but it emitted a pretentious light. It shrouded East Island and quickly shrouded the entire dark world. It was no longer the era of Sword Emperor and Deity. Under the shadow that shrouded the dark world was the absolutely invincible light of East Emperor. It was cold, majestic, awe-inspiring, deep, and immovable like a mountain. It was a shadow that completely made the entire East Island feel completely desperate. But Mai Shiranui actually found that she didn't feel the least bit unwilling in her heart. The kind of almost fanatical worship and admiration for Li Guangtu was like magma that had cooled down and erupted again, from the depths of her heart in an even more unstoppable manner. Mai Shiranui would eventually remember the first confrontation and meeting between her and Li Tianlan in East Island a few years ago. At that time she, who was proud and arrogant, never thought that one day she would be so eager to be conquered and even ravaged by that man. She was the goddess in the hearts of many people in East Island, and she was a powerhouse in the hearts of many people in the dark world. Women in the dark world never meant that they were weak, because no matter which era, there were women standing at the peak who showed the demeanor of women. More than 20 years ago there was Summer Solstice and Li Shi, two powerhouses who could be regarded as the peak combat power in the dark world. There was Bai Qingqian, a powerful figure who had begun to strive for the parliament. There was the female Prime Minister of England, and there was Rothschild King Tong who controlled the Shadow Throne. In the era before Li Tianlan, there was the silent but thunderous Samsara Palace Master who supported the entire Samsara Palace. There was Situ Tsangyue, the hidden god of Zhongzhou State who guarded Mount Taibai alone but radiated sharpness. There was the Holy Virgin Angel who controlled great power in the Holy Land. So the dark world was never lonely. It was the world of men, but women also had a bright sharpness that couldn't be ignored. In this era there was Qin Weibai, the patriarch of the Lin clan, who had faded away and stayed with Qin Weibai but no one dared to ignore. There was Dongqing Qiuqi, who had now ascended to the high position of governor in Jiangxia. There was Bai Yu, the genius of Jade Pool who had begun to touch the threshold of the invincible realm. There was Mai Shiranui who supported Liuhua Palace alone in East Island. There were many others. Mai Shiranui was not the most dazzling among these people, but her sharpness couldn't be ignored. Many people thought that Mai Shiranui would also become a dazzling figure who stood at the peak of the dark world and represented all the women of this era in the future. She was indifferent, arrogant, holy, noble, inviolable, and inviolable. People could only look at her from afar, admire her from the bottom of their hearts, and dream about her. This was the view of countless people in East Island about Mai Shiranui. But Mai Shiranui felt that she was a bitch. She had a beautiful appearance, excellent talent, and an extraordinary identity, but she was also a bitch with a strong servility. This was not to belittle herself, but her self-awareness that was difficult for others to talk about. From Li Guangtu to Li Tianlan. She couldn't resist that kind of power. This year she was 26 years old. She couldn't be said to be young, but she was definitely not old either. Her body was still delicate, no longer immature, and there was a trace of maturity. She was an age that became more attractive in everyone's eyes. Under Donghuang's shadow, she longed to get Li Tianlan's approval, to be conquered by Li Tianlan, to pull her over, to kneel at his feet, and to press her proud and beautiful head to accept something. She longed for Li Tianlan to throw her on the bed and tear her expensive clothes into pieces. She longed for Li Tianlan to crash and ravage her like a beast and eat her up bit by bit in her screams. There would even be whips, candles, or other things she had seen in East Island that she didn't care about before but secretly looked forward to when they were on Li Tianlan. She longed for Li Tianlan to use everything she had under her goddess halo and enjoy her most docile and charming side. Her charm wanted to bloom around Li Tianlan. That might be a kind of light that blended with Li Tianlan's light. She would wear the dazzling light of Donghuang and announce to the whole dark world that she was Donghuang's woman and enjoy the awe of the whole dark world. As long as she thought about it, it was a kind of pleasure that made her almost breathless. But Li Tianlan didn't say yes. He refused her request to be his woman, but he told himself that he needed a personal maid. The goddess in the hearts of East Island people. The maid of Donghuang. Mai Shiranui even thought it was very interesting, so she came to Emperor Dong's palace and even carefully prepared a lot of things. Mai Shiranui would never forget the strange expression on Xiao Mahai's face when he checked her luggage and found something like a whip in her suitcase. There were even some inconspicuous but interesting gadgets that could only be bought in East Island. Mai Shiranui didn't care. At that time, she burst into an extremely charming smile in front of Xiao Mahai and said that His Majesty Dong Huang asked her to bring it with him. There was no look of contempt in his eyes. She could even see a touch of pure awe and flattery in Xiao Mahai's eyes at that time. That feeling made Mai Shiranui's legs weak and her eyes a little misty. She was very sure that this was what she wanted. She knew that she could not break the limit of the invincible realm and enter the realm that she had never reached before. But she could lie docilely beside Li Tianlan, and the whole dark world would also fear and flatter her. Her Liuhua palace could also become a superpower, even if she was not in the invincible realm, even if she was just an ordinary person who didn't know martial arts. Mai Shiranui thought quietly. Her face was a little flushed and she rubbed her legs unconsciously, feeling that she was going to take a bath again. What are you thinking about? Li Tianlan's voice suddenly rang out in the brightly lit living room. Mai Shiranui's whole body shook. She didn't get up at first but unconsciously made a sound like a cat's meow, soft, delicate, mellow and sentimental. The blue veins on Li Tianlan's forehead jumped for no reason, and a nefarious fire almost uncontrollably rose from his abdomen. Your Majesty. Mai Shiranui stood up with a flushed face, a little cramped and a little flustered. A very subtle smell spread on her body. Li Tianlan glanced at her and asked directly, "Where is your room?" Mai Shiranui froze for a moment as if she couldn't believe it, but with some expectation she said softly, "It's next to yours. I cleaned it up myself. Your Majesty, would you like to have a look?" Li Tianlan waved his hand and said, "Now, go and have a rest. I'll call you if I need anything." Mai Shiranui stood where she was, stunned for a moment, then gave a soft, "Oh," and turned to leave. Li Tianlan glanced at her unconsciously, only to find that Mai Shiranui's delicate white dress swayed gently as she walked, and a small wet mark was gradually growing. He frowned and didn't think much about it. He asked casually, "What's the situation in East Island now?" East Island was undoubtedly the priority at the moment. With Mai Shiranui a chess piece, there shouldn't be too much trouble. Mai Shiranui paused and turned around. Her watery eyes became more and more hazy and she said in a soft voice, "It's chaotic and they're scared." Li Tianlan nodded thoughtfully. Mai Shiranui stared at him for a while, then turned around in disappointment and walked back to her room. The door of the room was gently closed and then opened again, leaving a very clear gap. After a while, the tempting pink light peeked out from the gap. Li Tianlan suddenly smiled and his smile was a little happy. He suddenly thought of Li Huaqing. He could probably understand some of Li Huaqing's thoughts. Li Huaqing began to show his own power. And he came to Tiannan probably because he was afraid that Li Tianlan would do the most extreme thing, which was also the reaction he least wanted to see. It was really a wonderful move. The domestic war was tit for tat. Did he think he could control the situation just by looking at him here? At this time, if he left Xinyuan City, Li Tianlan suddenly wanted to see Li Huaqing's reaction. Chapter 12-17. When military counselor called him, Li Tianlan was about to finish watching a classic Hollywood action blockbuster. The movie had come to the end. The overwhelming wreckage of machinery was flying in the fire, and the soldiers with shields were fighting fiercely with the muscular giants. In the distance was a ruined city, and the survivors were running for their lives. All kinds of high-tech weapons were in scrupulously blooming destructive flames in the air, and the endless legions were moving forward firmly in the surging artillery fire. One picture after another was reflected in his dull pupils. He sat quietly like a puppet, with countless thoughts flashing in his mind about East Island, about South America, about Europe. The urgent reorganization of the internal structure of Emperor Dong's palace, the establishment of various departments, the blueprint of the new group, the game with Li Huaqing, the various investments of the Flourishing Age Fund, the future of Tiannan, his future. Everything seemed to explode at once. Everything had to be done, and they had to be done as soon as possible. He didn't pay attention to what the movie was about. It was destined to be a blockbuster without too many connotations. The scenes were gorgeous and hot-blooded, and the special effects were all on. Li Tianlan's thoughts were scattered with the special effects on the screen. He looked quieter and quieter, sitting on the sofa motionlessly. Time was silent and so was he. Gradually he was so quiet as if he didn't exist at all. The phone rang. Li Tianlan's body moved slightly. He seemed to come alive all of a sudden. He exhaled softly, turned off the TV in front of him, picked up the phone and said, Your Majesty, Yuzhou is a little lively. Military counselor's voice was still calm, and he came straight to the point. He used the word lively very vividly. In fact, Yuzhou was more than lively now. Li Guangtu suddenly came to Emperor Dong's palace. Such an abrupt move directly shocked the whole Zhongzhou state, and Yuzhou was now in a state of complete uproar. The parliament had not yet held a meeting to formally announce or issue any orders. But all kinds of heavyweights had begun to meet frequently. Zhou Mulin and Bai Zhanfang were secretly meeting. According to the exact news, an hour ago Wu Jingmin, the deputy minister of the cabinet, also arrived at the Bai family's manor. Bai Qingzhao went to the building of the military department overnight. It was said that among the 4 spirits of Zhongzhou state, besides Li Wangxing, the black tortoise who was stationed in Tianan, Azure Dragon, White Tiger, and the new vermilion bird had all received orders to return to Yuzhou with their terracotta soldiers. Ji Wenzhang, Wan Qingyun, and Yi Dongxing had also started secretly contacting each other an hour ago. Guo Wentian seemed ready to leave for Southwest City. The speaker of the North City arrived at Yuzhou province overnight and entered Zhou Yunhai's home. Not only the parliament but also some powerful figures in Zhongzhou state had received the news and began to discuss the possible changes. Hua Xingyang's phone was ringing off the hook. Countless powerful people expressed their opinions one after another. Some hoped that Li Huaqing could be more cautious, and some hoped that Xinyuan City could take a step back. As the current CEO of Emperor Dong's palace, the military counselor also received calls from different people. Some wanted to strengthen cooperation, while others wanted to shelve previous cooperation plans. It was a complete mess. Demons danced in a frenzy. The turbulence had begun to spread to the entire Zhongzhou state from Yuzhou as the center. In 24 hours at most, the roaring hurricane would sweep across the entire Zhongzhou state. Is it exciting? Li Tianlan asked with a smile and a relaxed tone while holding the phone. Military counselor was silent for about half a minute. Obviously, he did not expect Li Tianlan's attitude to be like this at this time. Then he laughed and said, I've experienced such a battle once and I'm used to it. Your Majesty, the timing is a bit sensitive now, you know. Of course, Li Tianlan could understand what the so-called timing sensitivity meant. The problem of Li Guangtu had now become the focus between the academics and Emperor Dong's palace. Neither side would give in. Li Huaqing's arrival in Emperor Dong's palace made everyone a little uneasy. But before the situation changed, the uneasiness was just uneasiness. They would wait and see, look for opportunities and express their attitudes at the right time. The so-called right time was undoubtedly when the confrontation between the academics and Emperor Dong's palace had a clear winner. But now there was a big movement in Yuzhou. It was no longer as simple as waiting and seeing. The academics and Emperor Dong's palace had stirred up chaos. Now, all the other groups and wealthy families were obviously ready to take action and showed signs of entering the fray. What? There might be a lot of reasons. But there should be only a few of them who really wanted to help the academics or Emperor Dong's palace. The most important reason was because of the election. The eve of every election in Zhongzhou state was the most lively time. The situation seemed calm, but only the people in the game could really see the stormy waves. When it came to the group, every group had their own demands and wanted to complete their own layout. When it came to individuals, everyone also had their own goals. The relationship between each other, the competition inside and outside the group, and the cooperation in various fields were a complete mess. Everyone was fighting for a certain position for a certain side's benefits. From top to bottom, the fighting was endless, spreading to every domain, every group. It was a chaotic battle. Of course, the negotiation had to be negotiated. But just like Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan now, before the negotiation, both sides wanted to show their strength. Only with great strength could their words be taken seriously, respected, and even accepted. There was less than a year before the election. Undoubtedly, the major groups also wanted to show their strength. Only then would they have more bargaining chips and be able to ask for more things. Is it going to start now? Li Tianlan smiled and looked out of the window at the night that seemed to be gradually fading away. Xinyuan City in winter was still as warm as spring, but his body still remembered the coldness that pervaded Yuzhou. He narrowed his eyes and shook his head, saying, It's not the new year yet. It seems a little early. Because a lot of things need to be redistributed. Our appearance has impacted the structure of the six, and many people have long been unable to hold back. Military counselor's voice was a little understated. So in your opinion, Is it a good thing or a bad thing for Emperor Dong's palace this time? Neither good nor bad. The military counselor laughed. Everyone who enters the game has good intentions, but no one knows what kind of accident will happen until the end. We can only do what we should do. No matter if it's good or bad, we still need to operate. Li Tianlan's voice was more understated, even a little careless. Well, what can you do? Military counselor didn't speak for a while. He didn't know whether to give Li Tianlan a thumbs up or a middle finger in his heart. Li Tianlan's words, whether in an understated tone or a careless tone, were the essence of the boss. Li Tianlan's casual words obviously meant that the next task would be handed over to him. However, as the CEO of Emperor Dong's palace, it seemed to be his task indeed. This sentence was undoubtedly Li Tianlan's statement, which meant that military counselor could use all the resources that Emperor Dong's palace currently had to obtain greater benefits for Emperor Dong's palace in the next chaotic battle. As the supreme leader of Emperor Dong's palace, if Li Tianlan bowed to everything personally, the existence of military counselor and others would undoubtedly be meaningless. Li Tianlan was self-aware. He had indeed come to this position, but in terms of skill, layout, power, experience, he was not able to perfectly control all the internal details of a group. At the very least, he was not as good as military counselor in this respect. He just knew what he wanted and where Emperor Dong's palace would be next. This kind of thing involved the main strategic direction, but not the specific operation process, and Li Tianlan was competent. The goal of the new group after the election was very clear. In the case of keeping Jiangxia, they would take down the 4 provinces of Nanyue, Xie, Dongshan, and Jiangnan. In the case of perfecting the internal promotion system of the group, they would try their best to conquer the cabinet and occupy a relatively strong position. With the 5 provinces and Tiannan as the foundation, the radiating influence and the power of the cabinet would support each other. In the overall strategy of the whole Zhongzhou state, resources would be inclined to Emperor Dong's palace to a certain extent, and it would protect the integration of the new group, the giant group, and the North group. This was the strategic direction of Emperor Dong's palace in Zhongzhou state in the next 10 years that Li Tianlan had personally formulated. The next implementation, the allocation of a large number of resources, and the operation of human relations were the responsibility of the CEO military counselor. Li Tianlan gave the direction to lead Emperor Dong's palace. He didn't care about the process, only the final result. I'm on my way to the Bai family manor. On the phone, military counselor smiled gently. He was the CEO of Emperor Dong's palace, but after all he had nothing to do with the parliament of Zhongzhou state. On the surface he was just a businessman. At this time he naturally had to unite all the forces that could be united to intervene in this chaotic battle. Dongqing Wudi was still in Emperor Dong's palace. At present, Zhou Mulin and Bai Zhanfang represented the giant group in Yuzhou, and Wu Jingmin represented the power of the new group. Military counselor represented Emperor Dong's palace. Only when he, the CEO, was present could the power of the new group and the giant group operate smoothly and prepare for the next chaotic battle. The first thing we have to face is the academy. Military counselor's voice was very quiet and calm. In the chaos, his slow voice had a kind of reassuring and trustworthy power. Your Majesty, what are you going to do about Li Kuangtu? Li Tianlan was silent for a moment. Do we fight to the end? Or can we compromise? I can operate in Yuzhou, but first we have to be mentally prepared. Your decision means different results. The current situation is that our conflict with the academies has caused the current chaos. This is not a good thing, but it is not a bad thing either. At least to a certain extent, it shows that the initiative is in our hands, not in the hands of the academies. If we fight to the end, the first thing we have to face is the full attack of the academies. In this position, Li Huaqing can't be ignored. Once we fall into a disadvantageous position, other forces who don't want the new group to appear will undoubtedly attack us together. It's hard for us to resist, but once we do, our gains will be far beyond expectations. It's risky to fight to the end, but the benefits are also great. If we compromise, we can make full use of the initiative in our hands. When to compromise and when to hand Li Kuangtu over to the parliament, these are completely up to us. We can even use this to exchange something with the academies. Before the election, our preparation will be more leisurely. At present, compromise is a relatively rational choice. It's less risky and very safe. Military counselor's voice was clear and definite. So you prefer me to let him go? Li Tianlan asked. Military counselor seemed to think about the emotion in Li Tianlan's tone and finally said cautiously, "Everything is up to your Majesty. I'm in charge." Ha! Li Tianlan narrowed his eyes slightly and didn't speak for a while. He was indeed hesitant about how to deal with Li Guangtu. Li Guangtu's hostility to him was extremely obvious, but perhaps it was because of some fixed but later broken understanding of Li Guangtu since childhood, or because of Dongqing Rushi, or because of the sword Li Guangtu lent him in Reki City. It was because of the sword that Li Guangtu had lent him in Reki City, or something else that he couldn't tell himself. Therefore, even though Li Tianlan now had the strength above Li Guangtu, he didn't want to kill him very much. Jiang Shangyu might have also seen this. So he forcibly took Gu Xingyun away and left Li Guangtu. At that time, Li Tianlan could have killed Li Guangtu countless times in an instant, but in the end he chose to take him back to Emperor Dong's palace. From the perspective of Emperor Dong's palace, keeping Li Guangtu here and waiting for the situation to stabilize, Li Tianlan could already get up and go to Heaven Capital in Tiannan and use Li Guangtu as a bargaining chip to take over the entire purgatory of Heaven Capital. There was a saying in ancient times that one could order the vassals by holding the emperor by force. It was not accurate to use it here. Li Guangtu was not the emperor, but the meaning was not much different. As long as he controlled Li Guangtu, taking over the purgatory of Heaven Capital would be a matter of time. Those who were inclined to him no longer had to hesitate and would willingly join Emperor Dong's palace. Even those who were loyal to Li Guangtu, such as Dawn, Daybreak and Phoenix, would join because Li Guangtu was under the control of Emperor Dong's palace and become the sword of Emperor Dong's palace. Situ Tsangyue's occasional trance would not appear again. The relationship between Sai City and Mount Shu would gradually ease. Li Shi didn't have to recall the past. Keeping Li Guangtu would be an explanation to Dongqing Rushi, her grandfather, and the Li family. As long as Emperor Dong controlled Li Guangtu, Emperor Dong's palace could get a lot of things. From the perspective of Emperor Dong's palace, the parliament would also give him generous compensation if he handed over Li Guangtu. Dongqing Wudi brought Li Huaqing's bargaining chip. In the communication with Li Huaqing not long ago, he also explained it calmly. Beijiang was undoubtedly a piece of fat meat. But Li Huaqing didn't mean to exchange the position of the cabinet. In principle, he still supported by Qing Qian to go to the cabinet. He could also support Wu Jingmin to serve as a director and deputy prime minister. He would also support Zhou Yuanshan to go to Nanyue. Li Huaqing's original intention was to promote Wu Jingmin's first secretary Jian Kong, who was now in Jiangxia and had a very pleasant cooperation with Zhou Yuanshan and Dongqing Qiuqi, to the parliament of Zhongzhou State and let him take charge of Beijiang. Jian Kong's qualifications were undoubtedly insufficient. Even among dozens of provincial speakers in Zhongzhou State, his qualifications were the least, but his ability was beyond doubt. If Beijiang was handed over to Jian Kong, Li Tianlan would rest assured, and Zhongzhou State would also rest assured. The strategic significance of Beijiang was far more than just a member of parliament. That was the largest province in Zhongzhou State. It could be said to be vast and resourceful, but it could also be said to be sparsely populated. There were too many things that could be done in that land no matter what could be said or not. If the new group took over Beijiang after the election, they would undoubtedly become one of the top groups in Zhongzhou State. And not only the new group, but also Li Huaqing's concession to the Border Control Corps also meant that as long as Li Tianlan handed over Li Guangtu, the giant group could also get great benefits. This was the condition that Li Huaqing put forward. And it was certain that this was not all the conditions, but the most tempting one. As long as Li Tianlan was willing to talk about other details, there was absolutely room for discussion. Therefore, in the so-called overall situation of Emperor Dong's palace, it was beneficial to Emperor Dong's palace whether to release him or not. The difference was that if he didn't release him, he would get the purgatory of Heaven Capital, but he would have to resist the pressure from the parliament of Zhongzhou State. And if he released him, he would get a large number of bargaining chips headed by Beijiang, but in the future he would have to face the joint forces of Li Guangtu, Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shangyu. Li Tianlan was not afraid of making enemies. He was not even afraid that Li Guangtu would enter the supreme realm in the spiritual domain first. He just didn't want to be enemies with Li Guangtu and the purgatory of Heaven Capital represented by Li Guangtu. The brand of the Li family on the purgatory of Heaven Capital was so obvious. It could be said that he was indecisive, soft-hearted, or hesitant. Li Tianlan really didn't want to fight against them. That was tantamount to cutting off the beliefs he had grown up with, distorting his life and making the future more meaningless. And Li Huaqing and the parliament of Zhongzhou State were now undoubtedly forcing him and the Li family represented by Li Guangtu to go against each other. Li Tianlan held the phone and said after a while, "Let's wait and see. Things have to be done first. Don't be too anxious. Military counselor smiled on the other end of the phone. Now both sides are still at the stage of showing their strength. The second before the real showdown is the time for your majesty to consider. Li Tianlan said, I probably know what Li Huaqing wants to do. Military counselor continued, our intelligence department has received the news. Li Huaqing should want to re-establish the order of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state. He has talked with Gu Xingyun and Jiang Shangyu. Li Guangtu is also an indispensable part of his plan. In Li Huaqing's expectation in the future, the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state will set up several new corps as the core pillars of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state. Kunlun Corps, Commander Gu Xingyun, the main force is the current elite of Kunlun City. Heaven Capital Corps, Commander Li Guangtu, the main force is the current elite of the Purgatory of Heaven Capital. The third one, the source of the news, is a little vague. It should be called the Shadow Legion, Commander Jiang Shangyu, the specific composition of the personnel is unknown. In addition, there is the Snowdance Corps and the Nightmare Corps of Emperor Dong's palace, led by Your Majesty. It seems that the parliament will also give the special warfare system more power to speak. In short, Li Huaqing is very generous and it can be seen that he is very sincere. Military counselor's quiet and deep voice kept echoing. Li Tianlan held the phone and did not speak for a long time. Chapter 12:18. Li Tianlan could sense Li Huaqing's sincerity. If what the military advisor said was true, then Li Huaqing's actions could indeed be said to be very generous. To rebuild the order of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state and break the inherent concept, in a series of adjustments, Gu Xingyun would step down and Li Tianlan would step up quietly. In this case, Gu Xingyun could be regarded as losing all his face. But compared with Li Tianlan directly driving him out of the position of state-protecting war god, the ups and downs in this adjustment at least left the last trace of face for Gu Xingyun, and it could make him more reasonable to find a lot of excuses. Snow Dance, Nightmare, Kunlun, Tiandu, Umbra. If the 5 regiments were the core pillars of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state, then Li Tianlan would undoubtedly have a great advantage when facing others. The Snowdance Corps was originally his trusted team, and the Nightmare Corps was the main structure of Emperor Dong's palace. Of the 5 regiments he could absolutely control 2. Gu Xingyun, Li Guangtu and Jiang Shangyu each controlled 1. It seemed that the 3 of them together seemed to be more powerful than Li Tianlan, but it was just an appearance. Not to mention the size and equipment of the 5 legions, and the comparison of combat effectiveness between Li Tianlan and the 3 of them. After Zhongzhou state made this plan, if Li Tianlan agreed, then the support of the parliament for him would be completely different. This was Li Huaqing's attitude and sincerity. He could give it to Beijiang, Nanyue, Xie, Dongshan and Jiangnan, but he wouldn't touch Zhejiang either. If you want the initiative of the special warfare system, I can give it to you. If they wanted to support him, the parliament would not hesitate. The whole Zhongzhou state had already determined that Li Tianlan would be their real irreplaceable guardian in the next few decades, so Li Huaqing's attitude was very obvious. I can give you what you want. If you want to be promoted, I will personally push you up. What I want is just a part of the living space for others. Will you give it to me? From the perspective of Emperor Dong's palace and the Purgatory of Heaven capital, Li Huaqing was interfering in the internal affairs of the Li family. From the perspective of the special warfare system of Zhongzhou state, Li Tianlan was also trying to monopolize all the resources of Zhongzhou state. Arrogant, despotic, and domineering. Who was the one going too far? Li Tianlan hung up the phone and lit a cigarette. He got up from the sofa with some irritation and went to the huge and bright French window. Outside the window was the tranquil and beautiful night scene of Emperor Dong's palace. There were no bustling lights. Standing on the 6th floor of the castle, one could see water splashing silently into the air, flat and clean lawns, quietly swaying flowers and grass, clear flowing lake water, quiet wind and bright stars and moon. Li Tianlan smoked and remained silent. He didn't like this feeling. He really didn't like it. This was a clear and obvious feeling of being bound by something. He had reached the peak, but he had not walked out of the restrictions of the rules. From the second Li Huaqing came to Tiannan, Li Tianlan was very aware of a problem. He was indeed invincible. However, it wasn't as if he couldn't be destroyed. He stood at the pinnacle of this world that contained countless factors, rules, regulations, laws, clear barriers, clear standpoints, the glint of swords, mutual deception, carnage, conspiracies and betrayals, battles and killings. It was a world that was filled with games, negotiations, concessions, compromises, balance, ups and downs. It seemed magnificent, but it was actually a world that was constantly repeating itself. However, he was still tightly restricted by countless rules and could not be free. The crazy development of Emperor Dong's palace, power, wealth and status, all of them were like shackles wrapped around him. He could clearly see those shining responsibilities, and he could clearly feel his exhaustion, annoyance and even powerlessness. He wanted his life to move forward, but countless things were telling him that he had to take this step back. He didn't want to get involved in the chaos before the election. He didn't want to play games with Li Huaqing. He didn't want to hand over Li Kuang to Beijing, the parliament, the future, the country. They were all F***king things. If he didn't want to do something, then he wouldn't do it. If he fell out with Li Kuang, he would do it. At worst, Emperor Dong's palace would be destroyed. He would leave Zhongzhou state and kill all the people he wanted to kill. He would move forward and never look back. He wanted to do this, but he could only think about it. Reality and fantasy were different, and they would never be the same. His invincible power had brought him absolute power and wealth to the peak of the world. Now, he would have to carry these things on his back and do things that he didn't want to do. For example, he was trying to guess Li Huaqing's thoughts and bottom line, and he would fight for the greatest benefits in this chaotic battle. This was his life and future, and he seemed to be able to see the end with a single glance. Li Tianlan threw away the cigarette butt, took out another one, lit it and took a deep breath. A white, soft and slender arm stretched out. There was an ashtray in the slender fingers. A wisp of very pleasant fragrance came from beside him. It was not like the natural body fragrance of Qin Weibai, but it carried a kind of very seductive temptation. The owner of the arm stood quietly beside Li Tianlan, silent and gentle. Li Tianlan didn't say anything, just flicked the ash into the ashtray. The soft arm holding the ashtray was motionless. The cigarette burned out and Li Tianlan lit another. After smoking 3 cigarettes in a row, he took a deep breath, and the depression in his heart seemed to be exhaled bit by bit with the smoke. Li Tianlan's voice was calm and he said blandly, "Why don't you rest?" "I can't sleep." Mai Shiranui shook her head gently, took back the ashtray, and squatted down to pick up the cigarette but that Li Tianlan had thrown on the ground and put it in. Women in East Island were generally petite and exquisite. Mai Shiranui, who was 1.65 meters tall, was already considered tall in East Island, but in the face of Li Tianlan, who was 1.83 meters tall, she still needed to raise her head slightly. She raised her big bright eyes, and her long eyelashes trembled slightly. She looked at Li Tianlan, a little obsessed and a little absent-minded. She remembered the first time she met Li Tianlan. At that time in East Island she wore a red cheongsam, looking at Li Tianlan proudly and indifferently, with a condescending mockery. At that time, Li Tianlan was not as tall as he was now. Mai Shiranui smiled and said in a soft voice, "And master, you haven't slept yet." "How dare I sleep?" Her magnetic and sweet voice trembled slightly under the soft light, and her face quietly crept up with a touch of captivating red. In the past 20 years of life, this was the first time she had called a man of the opposite sex master. It was not a joke, but a voluntary expression of her meekness and submission. She didn't want to call this man His Majesty. That was what everyone in Emperor Dong's palace called him. There were many people in Emperor Dong's palace, and there would be more and more people in the future. Li Tianlan would get more and more used to the title Your Majesty. He would become accustomed to it and even numb to it. Maybe one day when everyone called Li Tianlan Your Majesty, Li Tianlan would forget his own name, let alone who had called him Your Majesty. At that time, Mai Shiranui, who also called him Your Majesty, might be like other inconspicuous people. Her gender, position and identity would be blurred. In the end she would be like a non-existent shadow. Mai Shiranui didn't want that. So she let go of her pride and reserve and called Li Tianlan Master. She was already his mate, so she should call him Master. She felt a sense of intimacy as if she was owned by him. Mai Shiranui was a little excited. Li Tianlan glanced at her, expressionless. Mai Shiranui, who was still dressed in a pure white suit, turned around and put down the ashtray. With a burst of fragrance, she poured a glass of water for Li Tianlan and said softly, "Master, if you don't want to rest, would you like to taste the tea ceremony that has been passed down in the Mai Shiranui family for a long time?" Li Tianlan took the glass and took a sip. He said lightly, "I want to drink wine, strong wine." "I'll get it." Mai Shiranui turned around with a chuckle. Her long hair flew, and her slender waist swayed gently. She came and went like the wind. In the dead of night. Beauty and strong wine. Li Tianlan's heart was restless, but it had nothing to do with desire. In the corner of the living room, There was a wine cabinet of moderate size, in which all kinds of famous wines were neatly placed, dazzling. In fact, Li Tianlan was not very interested in wine. The wine cabinet was also brought by Qin Weibai. She preferred to drink a little grape wine or red wine before going to bed, and Li Tianlan would drink some with her. However, Qin Weibai lived here for a short time, so the wine cabinet still looked full. My Shiranui did not touch the foreign vodka and the like. She bent down and turned out a bottle of high alcohol content Moutai, took 2 crystal glasses and put them in front of Li Tianlan, and then called the number 2 restaurant. The number 2 restaurant was on the 5th floor of the castle. It was a small cafeteria. Compared with the number 1 restaurant, the chef's skills and ingredients were nothing special. They were all top chefs transferred by Han Donglu from the hotels under the Flourishing Age Fund. However, the number of chefs in the number 2 restaurant was very small. There were about 20 people in the dessert, Western and Chinese dishes. To put it bluntly, they served Li Tianlan alone. They worked in 2 shifts and were on call 24 hours a day. Li Tianlan's time in Emperor Dong's palace was very short, so the number 2 restaurant became a special place for the high-level officials of Emperor Dong's palace. My Shiranui did not know much about Zhongzhou cuisine. She just said that His Majesty wanted to drink. Listening to her stiff but charming Chinese, Li Tianlan opened the bottle and filled the 2 crystal glasses in front of him. My Shiranui, who was talking on the phone, watched this scene. Her watery eyes were shining, and the corners of her soft lips were gently raised. Putting down the phone, my Shiranui stood up as she picked up the glass, walked to Li Tianlan, and bent down as if she wanted to sit close to Li Tianlan. Li Tianlan glanced at her and pointed to the sofa opposite him. My Shiranui was a little embarrassed. After a stalemate for less than a second, she finally pursed her lips and sat back. "Tell me about East Island," Li Tianlan said in a flat tone. My Shiranui was stunned. Holding the glass, she said slowly, "East Island is in chaos now. This was an inevitable phenomenon. With the destruction of Wuji Palace and Jifeng Sword Raining School, the dark world of East Island without a martial arts grandmaster was completely leaderless. Under such circumstances, it was difficult for other forces in East Island to really understand the situation in the shortest time, so chaos naturally occurred. They wanted to rise, but they didn't have the strength. So it was foreseeable that such chaos would not end in a short time under normal circumstances. But East Island was not in a normal situation now. Emperor Dong's palace would inevitably intervene in everything in the dark world of East Island. The royals who had been in control of all this might object, but their objection was meaningless. Emperor Dong's palace was invincible. When the elites of Nightmare Troop wiped out the remaining forces of East Island, what could the royals use to oppose Li Tianlan? Did they have to send troops to suppress them on a large scale in their own country? Not to mention whether they could do this. Even if they did, Emperor Dong's palace, which was backed by Zhongzhou state, was not something they could suppress at will. If they dared to move, the incident would undoubtedly escalate. Fight with Zhongzhou state. When these words were put together, no other country in the world had such confidence. When its special warfare system was completely destroyed and scattered, and the remaining stragglers didn't have the strength to protect their own territory, the strong intervention of external forces was unavoidable. Under such circumstances, the royals could at most give those stragglers some symbolic support. But when the external force that intervened was Emperor Dong's palace, the royals might not even have the courage to give their own people symbolic support. Some of the elites of Nightmare Troop were still in East Island, and they occupied Wangtian Pavilion, the former headquarters of Purgatory of Heaven Capital and Heaven Capital. There were not many of them, just 200 elites, and only 2 of them were in the Thundershocking realm. This kind of lineup was nothing in the eyes of East Island, and there was more than one force that could completely suppress this lineup. But so far no one dared to target these 200 elites. This showed their rationality to some extent. But at the same time, none of the forces had come into contact with this group of elites. This also showed how conflicted they were. But all of this was meaningless. Whether they were rational or conflicted, Emperor Dong's palace would march into East Island in an unstoppable manner. Those who obeyed it would prosper, and those who disobeyed it would die. The smartest way for East Island at present was to contact Emperor Dong's palace. It didn't matter if they didn't want to or not. But now that their special warfare system was about to be lost, they could only bow their heads and to some extent, test the opportunity to cooperate with Emperor Dong's palace. The royals really want you to go to East Island, Master. I think they should have a lot of things to talk to you about, but I guess they don't dare to leave East Island and come here. My Shiranui winked charmingly. If there's a chance, I'll go there. Li Tianlan took a sip of wine and said casually, "How's the strength of Liuhua Regiment now?" Liuhua Regiment. A familiar and confused look flashed in Mai Shiranui's beautiful big eyes. She had never heard of Liuhua Regiment, but somehow she felt the name was familiar. After a full 10 seconds she finally realized why this name was so familiar. Her master casually took her from East Island, and the goddess of the special warfare system of East Island became Dong Huang's personal maid. That was it? How could it be? Now it was just an understatement. Liuhua Palace, the force that used to be as famous as Jifeng Sword Raining School and Wuji Palace, the force that once had a supreme ninja of the invincible realm, the force that even surrendered to the purgatory of heaven capital, was still called Liuhua Palace. Between Li Tianlan's words, it had completely disappeared. From now on, there was no Liuhua Palace in East Island. The former ninja Holy Land was now the Liuhua Regiment. The Liuhua Regiment that belonged to Emperor Dong's palace. They were no longer a subsidiary force, but a part of Emperor Dong's palace. Mai Shiranui looked at Li Tianlan in a daze. The entire Liuhua Palace seemed to have been subdued by Li Tianlan's casual toast and careless words just now. This veteran force in East Island was simply drunk by Li Tianlan. It was more delicious than any dish that went with wine. At this moment Li Tianlan was so calm but also so domineering. Li Tianlan glanced at her. Mai Shiranui suddenly came to her senses. The strange thing was that she didn't feel any resistance in her heart. She was so calm as if she had already accepted this fact. She knew what this fact meant. Even when it became a subsidiary force of the Purgatory of Heaven capital, Liuhua Palace still had its own light, and the Purgatory of Heaven capital didn't intervene in the internal affairs of Liuhua Palace. In everyone's eyes, Liuhua Palace was still a local force of East Island, just serving the Purgatory of Heaven capital. For East Island, Liuhua Palace became the Liuhua Regiment, which was the most thorough betrayal. They directly changed from a local force to a plunderer of all kinds of resources in East Island. From now on, how would the special warfare system of East Island think of her? How would Liuhua Palace, no the Liuhua Regiment, deal with themselves? Mai Shiranui was silent. She looked deeply into Li Tianlan's eyes. "Master, let me be your woman, okay?" Mai Shiranui suddenly spoke. Her words were inexplicable, and her voice even sounded a little pleading. "There's no difference," Li Tianlan said blandly. He took off his shoes casually, stretched out his legs and put them on Mai Shiranui's knees. Mai Shiranui subconsciously straightened her body and hugged Li Tianlan's calf, letting Li Tianlan's feet touch her proud and tender breasts through her white blouse. She leaned forward and gently massaged his calf and feet. Li Tianlan moved his feet comfortably and said blandly, "You and the Liuhua Regiment both belong to me. This has nothing to do with whether we have sex or not. You don't have to worry about how the Liuhua Regiment and you will live in East Island in the future. Do you feel ashamed to face East Island? Hey, in fact, from the moment you surrendered to Emperor Dong's palace, you already had no choice. Emperor Dong's palace welcomes the Liuhua Regiment to join us, but you have to be sure of your position. How will the Liuhua Regiment face East Island? You don't have to face it. In the future, the Liuhua Regiment will develop in East Island as a ruler. When everyone has to bow down to you, how can you face it? For them, it makes no difference whether you are my maid or my woman. No matter which identity you have, you will be above them. If they don't recognize the truth, I don't mind washing them with blood again." Feeling Li Tianlan's subconscious slight strength in his feet, Mai Shiranui's body trembled slightly and her breathing quickened. She didn't know whether it was because of excitement or humiliation. She carefully massaged Li Tianlan, biting her lip tightly as she felt his natural indifference and arrogance. Li Tianlan looked at her and slightly narrowed his eyes. "In the Liuhua Regiment, there are 3 experts above the peak of the Thundershocking realm, including me. I'm a half-step to the invincible realm, and the other 2 are close to this level. There are 3 experts of the Thundershocking realm and 190 experts of the Fire-Flaming realm. This is the main framework of the Liuhua Regiment now. When the Purgatory of Heaven capital was in East Island, the Liuhua Regiment basically didn't have any combat missions, both internal and external. At that time, Li Kuangtu only asked us for one thing, and that was intelligence. The Liuhua Regiment has a deep foundation in East Island, and we have an innate intelligence advantage. So now, the Liuhua Regiment can be said to be the #1 intelligence organization in East Island. Almost all the sensitive events in East Island can't be hidden from our intelligence center." Mai Shiranui whispered. "With your intelligence advantage, can you find a way to quickly rule the dark world of East Island?" Li Tianlan glanced at her. "Theoretically, yes. Mai Shiranui nodded gently. Her slender and cool fingers slid across Li Tianlan's calf, bringing a tingling sensation. Li Tianlan understood what the so-called theoretically meant. He nodded and said, I will go to East Island, but only after you have initially established the authority of the Liuhua regiment. Emperor Dong's palace can give you support. You can choose a high-level official from Emperor Dong's palace and let him take some elites to East Island with you. He will serve as the deputy commander of the Liuhua regiment. Mai Shiranui bit her lip, and there was some hidden bitterness in her eyes. Say what you want to say. Li Tianlan said calmly. Master, I have some understanding of some things in Zhongzhou state. Mai Shiranui said with a smile. For example? Li Tianlan raised his eyebrows. For example, the more than 30 provincial speakers of Zhongzhou state. Mai Shiranui smiled elegantly and charmingly. I found that among the more than 30 speakers, some of them have very strange names. The corner of Li Tianlan's mouth twitched and he seemed a little embarrassed. He understood what Mai Shiranui wanted to say. In some places, the names of the speaker and the governor are very strange. Mai Shiranui's eyes were misty. I don't deny their authority. It's just that in those provinces, there is usually a deputy governor or deputy speaker whose division of labor is not very clear. They can be surnamed Li Wang, Sun, or Sun. Their names are very in line with the style of Zhongzhou state. It's very normal. Li Tianlan looked at her and said nothing. And in those places, every time something important happens, your news media will intentionally or unintentionally mention the deputy governor whose division of labor is not clear and is even somewhat like a marginal figure. Mai Shiranui blinked her big eyes and looked innocent. Master, why is that? Li Tianlan wanted to pull his foot back, but Mai Shiranui hugged him tightly. Mai Shiranui, who seemed to have completely adapted to the identity of a maid, was constantly stripping away the estrangement and distance between her and Li Tianlan. She pouted her lustrous red lips, as if she was dissatisfied and acting coquettishly. She was about to cry. Master doesn't trust me. You think too much. Li Tianlan shook his head. And it's also wrong. It has nothing to do with trust. You can choose any deputy commander of the Liuhua regiment. He will go with you to East Island, but he will only be a nominal member of the Liuhua regiment. He will not interfere in specific affairs, but will establish a new regiment that belongs to Emperor Dong's palace. He will be a nominal member of the Liuhua regiment, and then it will be easier for you to get in touch. Isn't that distrust? Mai Shiranui's eyes were still resentful. Of course not. Li Tianlan shook his head. He wanted to say something else, but he suddenly froze. He sat on the sofa in a daze and his eyes became a little dim. Mai Shiranui looked at him carefully, feeling uneasy. She could act coquettishly, she could complain, and she could desperately close the distance between her and Li Tianlan to create a more intimate relationship. This was the embodiment of her cleverness as a woman. But she knew very well when she should show these things and when she should put them away. Li Tianlan picked up the wine glass again and silently drank up more than half of the wine in one gulp. He let out a long breath and looked up at the soft crystal chandelier on the ceiling. At this moment, Li Tianlan finally realized that he had changed unconsciously. Because he thought of Li Huaqing. He thought of Li Huaqing's fierce but strong eyes that showed a touch of fatigue and persistence when he looked at him. It's not that I don't trust you. Li Tianlan's voice became a little low. On the contrary, it's because I'm responsible for you. He opened his mouth and his voice became even lower. Balance? As a special province in Zhongzhou state that had truly achieved some kind of freedom, the provincial government compound of Beihai province could be said to be the most luxurious provincial government compound in the whole Zhongzhou state. It used to be a large park in Xingzhou city. When it was renovated for the second time after its completion, it was approved by a patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai into a provincial government compound. It was surrounded by mountains and rivers, far away from the hustle and bustle. Dozens of huge and luxurious 5-story single-family villas were dotted among the green hills and blue waters. The structure had 3 floors above the ground and 2 floors below the ground. It was equipped with elevators, private lawns, private garages, private pools, private gyms, private cinemas, bars, and there was an international golf course inside the park. It could be said to be the real holy land of celebrities in the whole of Beihai. Luxury cars came and went all day and night. It was said that the third phase expansion plan of the provincial government compound had been approved. From the southern part of the provincial government compound, they could even get a small piece of sea area that belonged to the provincial government compound. At that time, A yacht club would be built here to provide entertainment for the speaker and directors. In the past hundreds of years, Beihai had been so ostentatious in various fields. This province was unimaginably comfortable and luxurious compared to other regions of the same level. In the eyes of other regions of Zhongzhou state, it was indeed a real alien and freak. It was no wonder that Chen Fangqing and even many people before him regarded Beihai as a thorn in their side. They saw the ostentatiousness of Beihai that even they envied, but they did not see or were unwilling to admit the calmness behind the ostentatiousness. Beihai maintained a strong autonomy from top to bottom, which made Zhongzhou state extremely uncomfortable. Most of the laws of Zhongzhou state applied here, but there were also some laws and rules made by Beihai itself. There was only one dominator in Beihai, and that was Mount Dibbing. Hundreds of years of iron-like facts had proved one thing countless times. If Mount Dibbing was stable, the whole of Beihai would be stable. From the speaker, the governor, the commander of the Beihai Corps to the deputy speaker, deputy governor, the speaker and mayor of each city, the middle and high officials of each key department, and the grassroots, Zhongzhou state had the right to make suggestions. But Mount Dibbing had the right to appoint all these people. All this seemed completely incredible today, but it also explained the glory of the Wang family of Beihai from another perspective. Beihai province's high-tech cultivation that had lasted for hundreds of years had made countless people jealous. It had also kept Beihai the core attraction for a large number of smart and capable young people in Zhongzhou state. Except for the top management, few people in Beihai were transferred to other places. But occasionally, some young and strong people from Zhongzhou state would be transferred to Beihai. Almost every transfer of a position would cause a lot of trouble. Everyone desperately wanted to work in Beihai, and a considerable part of the reason was the incredible welfare system here. Was there a speaker in Zhongzhou state with a personal net worth of billions who seemed to be above board and not afraid of being investigated? Yes, in Beihai. Was there a governor in Zhongzhou state with a personal net worth of billions who was also not afraid of investigation? Yes, also in Beihai. Was there a general in Zhongzhou state with a personal net worth of billions who was not afraid of investigation? Or in Beihai? In the latest issue of Beihai's salary adjustment, the salary of the speaker of Beihai, the governor of Beihai, and the first deputy commander of the Beihai Corps was 75 million Zhongzhou dollars. 75 million a year. The second-level director of Beihai had an annual salary of 60 million a year. Non-director deputy governor members had an annual salary of 50 million. As for the cities in Beihai, the mayor of Xingzhou got the salary of a director. The first and second leaders of other cities and key departments at the provincial level generally had an annual salary of about 30 million. The deputy positions were between 10 million and 15 million. Further down, the city departments, bureaus, offices, departments, and staff had a clear salary at each level. 3 years ago, according to the real statistics of Beihai province, an ordinary staff member in Beihai earned 680,000 Zhongzhou dollars a year. 400,000 was the annual salary, and 280,000 was the unit bonus. Mount Dibbing paid tens of billions of salary for the administrative system of Beihai every year. This was just a salary, not some investment or starting some project. It was just a simple salary. In the completely unbelievable and even absurd salary, Beihai province was also creating more incredible benefits for Mount Dibbing almost crazily. The administrative system of Beihai was the most streamlined in the whole Zhongzhou state. In some cities in Zhongzhou state, there were more than a dozen deputy chiefs at any time. However, the structure of only 5 deputy chiefs in each city of Beihai was unique. Everyone had a clear division of labor and clear responsibilities. Therefore, their organization was the most streamlined but the most efficient. Sitting in their positions, whether it was a leader or a staff member, everyone was doing their best to be responsible for their own work seriously. They even wanted to broaden their work scope and get the greatest work results. The director of industry spent most of his time doing research. The director of investment promotion took his subordinates and ran around like a group of salesmen all day long. It was an indescribable atmosphere of desperation and seriousness. Fanatical, excited, and happy. Everyone was working hard to do their own things, and wholeheartedly to make everyone in Beihai live a better life. The year-end audit of Beihai was completely in the charge of the core personnel of Mount Dibbing. There was no falsehood at all. It was specific to each city and department. If one did a good job, in addition to the annual salary, there would be a considerable part of the absolutely generous bonus. If one did a bad job, the salary would be downgraded. 2 consecutive salary downgrades and the appointment would be cancelled. Sharp, accurate, and clear. Along with the super high salary, there was cruel and almost brutal punishment in the administration of officials. This was a sharp sword hanging over the heads of everyone in Beihai. If the amount received was more than 100,000 yuan, life imprisonment, no commutation for life. If the amount received was more than 500,000 yuan, the death penalty would be carried out immediately. If the amount received was more than 1 million yuan, death punishment. This could definitely be regarded as the most thorough regulation that Beihai had ever implemented. The degree of its implementation was as firm as the wages that Beihai had never been in arrears for hundreds of years. There was no room for maneuver. No matter what the relationship was in Zhongzhou State, no matter whether the recipient's family was in Beihai, Zhongzhou State, Star State, or any corner of the world, as long as the amount received was more than this limit, death was everywhere. When the first heavenly son of Beihai personally made this law on the stage of Formidable Person, he said, "This is the overall situation of Beihai." When the incredibly high salary was compared with the huge and unbearable cost of making mistakes, no matter how greedy a person was, he could completely calm down and feel the shock. In the hundreds of years in Beihai, there were very few recipients. In the hundreds of years there were less than 20. 20 people without exception received more than the limit. Therefore, no one in the 20 families could escape the judgment of the Wang family of Beihai. The huge temptation and absolute pressure had created the current Beihai. There were basically no so-called complaints in all the administrative departments, and all kinds of problems encountered by the people would be solved immediately. Beihai had lost some of the darkness, so the gray living space had also been completely erased. Not to mention society, even the hoodlums in schools could not be seen anymore. Everyone knew that some things had no future. There was no absolute fairness in the world, but Mount Dibing created a Beihai province for everyone. As long as they worked hard, they could certainly change their lives and destinies. Whether it was fair or not, at least it was worth the sincere expectation of every person in Beihai. They lived and worked in peace and contentment, singing and dancing to promote peace and prosperity. They might also encounter competition in the workplace, be surpassed by people who were better than them, encounter all kinds of difficulties, all kinds of problems, and all kinds of things that they could not tell others. They would still stagger or sing all the way in a hurried and busy life. But in this land, there was no procrastination of the administrative department, no hidden daggers in the smiles of gray people, and no unjust treatment of the big fish eating the small shrimps. Even some of the distorted ideas in Zhongzhou State were not many here. People in Beihai always believed in one thing. If your life did not change, it was not the problem of society, but your choice was wrong. How simple was this sentence? But this was Beihai. There was no outside storm, no desperate gray, no special features that could destroy the will. Outside Beihai there was another world. But in fact, these so-called no, and even more things, those things from all corners and fields intended to reach deep into Beihai for some purpose, did all of this really not exist? That was impossible. Darkness and gray had always existed, but they could not enter Beihai. All of this turned into overwhelming pressure and fear that seemed to be able to destroy everything. It fell on Mount Dibing and on every patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai for hundreds of years. Generation after generation. They silently carried all of this, the storm, and the stormy waves, and never took a step back. In front of the number 1 building in the courtyard of Beihai provincial government. When Siyuan met Wang Xingxiao, the gorgeous morning sun was rising from the sea level in the east. The warm light penetrated the darkness and pierced the dark clouds in the sky. The light fell from the sky and pierced Wen Siyuan's eyes. In his sight, Wang Xingxiao was walking over step by step. The sword energy was dense and the space was twisted. The sunlight falling on him seemed to form a halo around him. The sun lit up the sky and fell on the clear lake in the courtyard of the provincial government. The waves were sparkling. Wang Xingxiao seemed to be walking in the light waves of the sky and water. His figure was majestic. When Siyuan stood up from the stone table in front of the door, Wang Xingxiao's figure walked into a verdant courtyard. "Xingxiao, you're getting more and more stable." When Siyuan smiled gently and his voice was gentle and deep. This speaker of Beihai, who had now gained the full support of the Wang family of Beihai and most of the support of the Southeast Group, was not tall. He wore glasses and looked elegant. Even if he dressed casually in his own home, he stood there with an indescribable grace, confidence, and gentleness. At first glance, people would have a good impression of him and a sense of trust. "Uncle Wen, I'm sorry to disturb you." Wang Xingxiao shook hands with Wen Siyuan and joked. "Other people outside make me busy every day. Now you come to my home and make me busy every day. You're not kind." Wen Siyuan chuckled and waved his hand. Let's go inside. Forget it. Let's sit outside. Wang Xingxiao shook his head. He knew Wen Siyuan's habits. This man started in Yuzhou, walked out of the Ministry of Supervision, entered the cabinet, went to Huading, and finally came to Beihai from Wuya. He served as the deputy speaker of Xingzhou, the mayor, the speaker, and also the deputy speaker of Beihai. From the governor's position to the leader of the Southeast Group, he liked to sit outside the yard in the morning. His biological clock was very regular. He usually got up at 5:30 a.m. For 2 hours after getting up, he never dealt with official business. Instead, he sat in the yard in front of the door in a daze, listened to music, and completely let himself go regardless of the weather. He started eating breakfast at 7:30 a.m., got ready to go to work at 8 o'clock a.m., came back at 6 o'clock p.m., ate, watched the news, and chatted with his family. If there were no accidents, he would go to bed on time at 10 o'clock p.m. The whole of Beihai developed quietly in this routine day after day. It was stable and magnificent. Now when Siyuan invited him into the house, which was undoubtedly to accommodate him, Wang Xingxiao casually sat on the cold stone bench in winter, handed Wen Siyuan a cigarette and said softly, "I didn't plan to visit you at this time, but there were a lot of things last night, so I had to disturb your relaxing time. I already know what's going on." Wen Siyuan nodded and looked at Wang Xingxiao with appreciation in his eyes. The second place on the divine list. Not bad. You are still young. In another 10 years, it is hard to say who will be the first. Tianzong was not as good as you when he was young. At that time, Li Guangtu showed off his ability just like Li Tianlan now. He suppressed Tianzong. But what happened later? It was Tianzong who topped the divine list and even entered the heavenly sun realm. The future is so long. Who can say for sure? Wang Xingxiao smiled bitterly. Looking at the rising sun, he laughed at himself and said, "I, the second place on the divine list, can be said to be the real shadow of my father." Without Wang Tianzong's supreme sword energy, Wang Xingxiao now had the strength of the half-step invincible realm, and there was still a long way to go before he reached the invincible realm. The second place on the divine list? He couldn't even get to the bottom of the divine list. Still the same sentence. Wen Siyuan's voice was calm. The future is so long. Who can say for sure? Wang Xingxiao nodded and said, "This is not the most important thing. I didn't come here to seek comfort because I lost my life in Mount Dibbing." Wen Siyuan's eyes flashed. The new ranking of the divine list had become an established fact and could not be changed. In fact, Beihai had known this result for a long time. The glorious list that shone in the dark world now was signed by Wang Xingxiao, who represented the recognition of the Wang family of Beihai. Wen Siyuan said that he already knew what happened last night. Obviously, although the fact that the new ranking of the divine list could not be changed was shocking, it was not enough for people who knew Wen Siyuan to break his routine. Compared with the dark world that was still sensational, the whole Zhongzhou state had been completely attracted by the fact that Li Huaqing suddenly came to Emperor Dong's palace. "What do you want to do?" Wen Siyuan looked at Wang Xingxiao and asked with a chuckle. "Before we do anything, we have to know what Li Huaqing means." Wang Xingxiao took a drag on his cigarette and frowned slightly. It should not be difficult to guess what he means. Wen Siyuan shook his head. This was the most sober and calmest time of the day, so what he said seemed to have an unquestionable power. Li Huaqing can't let Li Tianlan leave Zhongzhou state. He went to Xinyuan city, which is a guarantee. As long as he is still in Emperor Dong's palace, no matter how fierce the fight outside is, Li Tianlan will not really turn against him. It doesn't matter if it is a fight, a tit-for-tat, or even a life-and-death fight. For Li Tianlan, no matter whether he dares to do it or not, it is a fact. Li Huaqing in Emperor Dong's palace is equivalent to putting his life in Li Tianlan's hands. This sense of security will not even let Li Tianlan have the idea of turning against him completely. Now the idea of both sides is very simple. They each have a trump card and there is room for negotiation, but no one is convinced by the other. Li Huaqing wants to control Li Tianlan and let Emperor Dong's palace better serve Zhongzhou state. Li Tianlan is dissatisfied with Li Huaqing because of the Li family. Li Guangtu? This is actually just a cover. Of course, this cover is indispensable. But the core problem is still Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan. They can negotiate, but they don't want to. Both sides are afraid of making a bad start and giving in without a bottom line in the future. So they can only fight. Today I will take you down, next year you will take me down. Fight. When you are tired of fighting, sit down and talk. Anyway, Li Huaqing is in Emperor Dong's palace, so it is very convenient for both sides to communicate. They can talk at any time. If they can't reach an agreement, they can continue to fight. Both sides are now showing off their strength, so that they can put forward better conditions in the final negotiation. Now the whole world knows Li Tianlan's trump card, so it is too easy to guess. Both Emperor Dong's palace and Li Tianlan have the right to negotiate, so his trump card is a life and death struggle. Once he leaves Zhongzhou state, all the people who have offended him in Zhongzhou state have to be cautious like frightened birds, guarding against his possible assassination and beheading at any time. This is Li Tianlan's personal power. Under the counterattack of Zhongzhou state, Emperor Dong's palace is destroyed. Apart from other things, the flourishing age fund alone is enough to cause a shock to the global financial order. The financial storm is very likely to evolve into a worldwide financial crisis. Many domestic fields will also be shaken at the same time, causing a huge social impact and immeasurable losses. At that time, if that really happens, the huge impact is estimated to be enough to make any prime minister step down directly. And the destruction of Emperor Dong's palace also means that Zhongzhou state will lose the elite forces of Emperor Dong's palace, Sai City, half of Mount Shu, and even half of Jade Pool. Dong Qingwudi of the giant group won't let it go. The consequences will be even more unbearable. Li Huaqing, who caused all this, will be the one who caused all this. Li Huaqing, who caused all this, even the entire academics, can't bear the consequences. Li Tianlan has now grown to the extent that he is able to drag Zhongzhou state into trouble. If not, why does Li Huaqing have to be so careful? But if he wants to do this, the price is not what Li Tianlan can bear. When all this happens, Emperor Dong's palace must have been destroyed. The whole Zhongzhou state regards him as a mortal enemy. So what if Li Tianlan is invincible in the world? When Zhongzhou state wants to kill a person with all its strength, even if it is not his opponent, there are still a lot of other ways. In that case, Zhongzhou state will be very uncomfortable, and so will Li Tianlan. When Siyuan's voice paused and then he continued, so it is unlikely that Li Tianlan will use this trump card. But anyway, this card is in his hands. Since he appeared in the sight of Zhongzhou state, the outside world has been comparing you with Li Tianlan and Gu Hanshan. Now Gu Hanshan has long been eliminated, and Jiang Shangyu has joined. Among the three of you, Li Tianlan's talent and strength are beyond doubt, but he is too radical. In terms of strength, you and Jiang Shangyu are not as good as Li Tianlan, but in terms of calmness, Li Tianlan and Jiang Shangyu are not as good as you. In terms of forbearance, you and Li Tianlan are not as good as Jiang Shangyu. If the situation happened to you and Jiang Shangyu today, Zhongzhou state wouldn't be too worried, because the possibility of you compromising is very high. As for Li Tianlan, of course, it's also possible for him to compromise, but the possibility of him directly falling out with you is also very high if he doesn't compromise. His character makes many people worry and even fear him. If Li Tianlan plays this trump card in extreme anger, I'm not surprised at all. At that time, the new group and the academics will die together, and Zhongzhou state will be in deep trouble. Wang Xingxiao shrugged. That's why Li Huaqing will rush over. As long as he is there, the possibility of this happening is very low. When Siyuan said faintly, the most important thing is that Li Huaqing definitely has a trump card in his hand, and it is a decisive one. After analyzing the current situation, he thinks that as long as he plays this card at the right time, Li Tianlan will definitely compromise, and there will be no second choice. What will it be? Wang Xingxiao's eyes flickered a little. Countless people were analyzing Li Tianlan's character, but no matter how they analyzed it, one thing was certain. Li Tianlan was completely amenable to coaxing but not coercion. It was difficult for the so-called threats and oppression to make him compromise. Maybe at that time he would rather die in glory than live in disgrace. He shook his head slightly and said softly, anyway, it is unlikely to be a threat or anything. Then it can only be interest. When Siyuan said lightly, what interest can move Li Tianlan the most thoroughly? Let him compromise quickly and let Li Guangtu go, even if he will become Li Guangtu's opponent, even if it will make the integration of the Li family become far away? How great is such a benefit that Li Huaqing is so sure that Li Tianlan will compromise? Wang Xingxiao was silent. His thoughts were a bit chaotic, but he knew what Wen Siyuan meant. Even though he didn't know what Li Huaqing's trump card was, from these few words, he could understand that this trump card represented unimaginable benefits. It was almost unprecedented, and could even be said to be unprecedented in history. But what could it be? It can't be that Li Huaqing intends to have Qin Weibai kidnapped to threaten Li Tianlan, right? Wang Xingxiao made a joke. When Siyuan was stunned and actually began to think about this possibility. Is Qin Weibai still in Zhongzhou state? Wang Xingxiao was also stunned and said helplessly, "Uncle Wen, I'm just kidding. How is this possible? Why not?" When Siyuan looked at Wang Xingxiao deeply, his eyes flickering. If he does this, he will completely become a sworn enemy of Li Tianlan. Even if Li Tianlan will compromise, will Li Huaqing really dare to let Qin Weibai go back in the situation of a dead end? He can only bite the bullet and control her. What is this? Keep her captive? Let her meet Li Tianlan once a year. Let Li Tianlan become a slave and fighter of Zhongzhou state? Wang Xingxiao's voice was a little cold. When Siyuan looked at him quietly. So you think that even so, Li Tianlan will not compromise? If that's the case, then there's no possibility of compromise. Wang Xingxiao's voice suddenly became incomparably calm. In some ways I am the same as him. Putting myself in his shoes, if Li Huaqing touches Song Ci, I will not compromise. Instead, I will try my best to retaliate at all costs. So if Li Huaqing really does something stupid, then Li Tianlan will definitely go directly to Yuzhou and massacre the academics. What else can Li Huaqing do unless he is crazy and completely disregards Zhongzhou state? Facing the crazy Li Tianlan, will he really dare to kill Qin Weibai? So it can only be interests. When Siyuan looked at Wang Xingxiao thoughtfully and nodded. Wang Xingxiao did not speak. He frowned and was preoccupied. The conflict between Li Huaqing and Li Tianlan had attracted the attention of the whole Zhongzhou state. The confrontation began, the chaos was coming, and before the election the sensitivity of this time could not be overstated. All the major groups, even the local teams that wanted to be promoted to groups, were cautious at this time, but they were also ready to make a move. Every decision-maker's every move at this time would first think about not losing points, and then they would think about fighting for more things. They were extremely cautious. In the hundreds of years of history of Zhongzhou state, the Southeast Group, the Prince Group, the North Group, and the Giant Group had all made mistakes at this point because they were too aggressive. As a result, they couldn't recover for 10 years, 20 years, or even longer. They still existed today. It showed that they barely survived. Similarly, there were also teams that were not inferior to the Southeast Group and the Prince Group. Because of a wrong decision at this time, they were defeated and eventually disappeared from everyone's sight. The most recent example was the North Group. A few decades ago, the scale of the North Group was no less than the current Southeast Group and Prince Group. It had 2 stable director positions and 5 to 7 counselors. In the North City, the Northeast region, and more than half of the Northwest region, it was powerful and influential. However, because of a single mistake in decision-making, the various groups that had been restless seized the opportunity to bite the North Group and tear it apart. During that period, the Prince Group tore a large piece of Northwest territory from the North Group. The Giant Group also directly grew stronger at that time. The academics also appeared for the first time at that time and began to use Liaodong as the foundation. After decades of operation, it developed to the present situation. The Southeast Group also made some mistakes during that period, but in the end, it also tore Longjiang province from the North Group. Correspondingly, the North Group retreated step by step, and in the end they only managed to defend the North City. Compared to their previous grandeur, the North City's current structure of 1 director and 2 counselors was only slightly stronger than the precarious Special Warfare Group. The election was getting closer and closer. With the conflict between the new group and the academics, there would inevitably be more and more people who could not help but directly enter. Wang Xingxiao also wanted to take action, but he did not dare to act rashly, so he consulted Wen Siyuan. Wen Siyuan was the flag figure that the Southeast Group fully supported after the election. In the next 10 years, the layout of the Southeast Group would be constructed by Wen Siyuan and Yi Dongxing as the directors, so his opinion was crucial. In fact, after talking with Wen Siyuan, Wang Xingxiao would immediately fly to Yuzhou to meet Yi Dongxing, Ji Wenzhang, Wan Qingyun, and the counselors of the Southeast Group. He also wanted to bring Wen Siyuan's opinion to them. I think we'd better play it safe. Wen Siyuan hesitated for a long time before he slowly opened his mouth. Wang Xingxiao did not speak. The door of the villa opened, and a gentle young woman in her early 30s came over with 2 cups of tea. She smiled sweetly. Xingxiao, you're here. I've prepared breakfast. It's a new invention. Try it later. Wang Xingxiao smiled and called Sister Qing, nodded and said yes. When Qing put the tea in front of the 2 of them, smiled and turned to leave. She was Wen Siyuan's daughter and was now the deputy director of the finance department of Beihai University. She usually kept a low profile, while her husband was now one of the directors of Xingzhou City and a popular candidate for the mayor of Xingzhou City after the election. He had a good relationship with Wang Xingxiao and was destined to be Wang Xingxiao's right-hand man in the future, probably similar to the relationship between Wang Tianzong and Wen Xiyuan. Wang Xingxiao picked up the teacup and took a sip of the hot tea, feeling a kind of warmth in the cold wind of winter in Beihai. "Play it safe," he muttered to himself. "Play it safe." Wen Xiyuan nodded. "Don't act rashly. I personally think that as the conflict between the academics and the new group intensifies, some of Li Huaqing's intentions will gradually be exposed. The current situation is a little dangerous. No one knows what kind of trump card Li Huaqing is hiding. We don't need to worry before we get the clues." When Xiyuan lifted the lid of the teacup and tapped the rim with the lid, in the clear sound of the collision he continued to say, "Of course playing it safe doesn't mean that we don't move. Soon there should be a clear signal between the academy and the new group. When everyone's attention is attracted, we should find a suitable opportunity to do something of our own." Wang Xingxiao's pupils suddenly contracted and light gathered. When Xiyuan looked into his eyes, moved the corner of his mouth and said faintly, "What do you think about Wu Yue's problem?" Wang Xingxiao lowered his eyelids and said nothing. Wu Yue. Wang Qinglei. This had already become a problem that the Southeast Group and the Wang family of Beihai had to pay attention to. Wang Qinglei had become more and more active in Zhongzhou State in the past 2 years. Whether he attended various activities or made discoveries on various occasions, everyone could clearly feel that he had drifted away from the Southeast Group and was heading in the opposite direction. Instead, he was getting closer to the Prince Group. Wang Qinglei was a senior counselor. With his qualifications, if he didn't betray, the Southeast Group was ready to push him and Wen Xiyuan to be directors of Zhongzhou State. 5 years later, Wang Qinglei was also a suitable candidate to compete for the position of president in the eyes of the Southeast Group. Perhaps it was the long-term oppression under the shadow of Wang Tianzong, or he felt that it was unlikely for him to sit in that position in the Southeast Group, or he could no longer control his ambition. In the days when he was fully fledged, his remarks made his position more and more subtle. In the end, when Wang Tianzong completely fell, he betrayed the Wang family of Beihai. What made the Southeast Group more sleepless at night was that Wang Qinglei was now the chairman of Wu Yue. Wang Qinglei was very influential in the Southeast Group, but after all, this was a blatant betrayal. Not everyone agreed with him and not everyone wanted to change. In this election, it was impossible for the Southeast Group to support Wang Qinglei. On the contrary, the Prince Group, which was getting closer to him, would support Wang Qinglei to become a director. However, this kind of support was also reserved. If Wang Qinglei wanted to go further in the Prince Group, the first thing he had to do was to face the current chairman of the Southwest Group. He and Yi Dongxing could be said to be the strongest opponents in the Southeast Group and the Prince Group, respectively. Tan Zhao, the chairman of the Southwest Group, was no worse than Wang Qinglei in terms of qualifications. Compared with Wang Qinglei, who joined the Prince Group halfway, Tan Zhao's position in the group was obviously more deep-rooted. His existence affected many circles inside the Southwest Group, big and small. If Wang Qinglei wanted to defeat Tan Zhao in the Prince Group and get most of the support of the Prince Group, he had to do something first. Simply put, the Prince Group needed Wang Qinglei's proof of loyalty, or in other words, a sufficient expression. What could Wang Qinglei use as a proof of loyalty? A gift that was big enough to defeat Tan Zhao, Wu Yue? The whole Wu Yue. It could only be Wu Yue. If Wang Qinglei could win Wu Yue for the Prince Group and tear this most developed province in Zhongzhou State, which was even above Nanyue from the Southeast Group to the Prince Group, it was indeed enough to persuade most of the forces of the Prince Group to support him to fight for the position of director. Wu Yue. A stable position as a member of parliament. A cultivation base for countless outstanding talents. A huge influence in various fields. These were all things that the Prince Group could try its best to fight for. Wang Xingxiao could even be sure that in the following chaotic battle, the strategy of the Prince Group without control was to target the Southeast Group while keeping an eye on the new group. After Wang Qinglei, the most likely person to succeed Wang Qinglei was Yu Chuanguang, the former mayor of Huading and the current governor of Wu Yue. He was Wang Xiaoyao's best friend and loyal follower. He was also Wang Qinglei's firmest ally. As long as they pushed away some of the Southeast Group spies in Wu Yue and pushed Yu Chuanguang up, the Prince Group would not only get Wu Yue, but also win over Wang Xiaoyao, an expert at the peak of the Invincible Realm, and the right to speak in Snow Country. After grasping these, the Prince Group would have more chips to use Snow Country as the foundation to attack everything Li Tianlan had in Reki City. How to deal with Wang Qinglei and Yu Chuanguang. How to deal with Wang Xiaoyao. At present, the entire Southeast group had no way to deal with them, because they couldn't find their flaws for the time being. If Wuxia fell, in the past 2 decades the Southeast group had failed in every election and had never won. On the eve of the election more than 20 years ago, the Southeast group had undergone great changes inside. The Li family had collapsed and the entire Southeast group had also suffered a heavy blow. It could be said that the Wang family of Beihai had scraped the bones to cure the poison. But failure was failure and loss was loss. More than 10 years ago, Huading had fallen, and the entire Southeast group had retreated in defeat. It had finally stabilized its position. But guarding Huading, Wuxia, and Beihai, the grand occasion of being the first group in Zhongzhou state had disappeared. And now, was it going to lose Wuxia again? If so, although the only remaining Beihai was not alone, the influence of the Southeast group in Zhongzhou state would undoubtedly further shrink and reduce. Wang Xingxiao's eyes were a little hollow. After a long while, he nodded and whispered, "I know what to do." After a pause he continued, "It's time to do something. Wuxia, it's time to move." When Siyuan nodded and said without batting an eyelid, "That's my opinion. But Wuxia, where are you going to start?" Eastern Station District. Wang Xingxiao said calmly, "Brother Jiang has rested for more than 2 years and now he is on the divine list." Without Wang Qinglei and second uncle's gossip, it's time to let him out. Di Jiang. When Siyuan's eyes lit up slightly and he smiled. "This is a good entry point." Wang Xingxiao also smiled. He turned his eyes to the setting sun and looked into the distance. The slight fog in winter in Beihai gradually dissipated in the sun. And in this morning the loud sound from Yuzhou, Liaodong, and Huading had torn the mist of Beihai in an extremely abrupt situation and radiated to Wang Xingxiao and Wen Siyuan. Their phones rang almost at the same time. The storm that shook the entire Zhongzhou state turned into thunder that tore the sky. Lightning flashed and thunder roared and the storm raged. Liaodong. Tan Xiaotian, the secretary of Wang Wei, the leader of the 3rd Supervisory Group, who had gone to Jiangxia, was suspected of serious violations of records and was under the control of the Liaodong Ministry of Supervision. The Ministry of Police, Ministry of Publicity, Ministry of Personnel, and other departments began to take action at the same time. In the morning, as many as 20 people had been involved in Tan Xiaotian's incident, and more people were involved. Wang Wei, the leader of the 3rd Supervisory Group who had arrived in Jiangxia, locked himself in the hotel room all morning and did not go out. The storm in Liaodong was fierce, rolling up the snow in the northeast. In the raging wind and snow, everyone seemed to be able to see by Qingqian's calm but ubiquitous sharpness in the calm eye of the storm. At the same time in Yuzhou, headed by the Ministry of Sleep and the Financial Administration Bureau of Zhongzhou State, more than 5 departments launched investigations into a series of issues such as Yuzhou Brilliant Real Estate, Dongwu Science and Technology and Preaching International Group's sneaky sleeping, disrupting the order of the persimmon market, commercial fraud, piracy, and infringement. Wuxia. The headquarters of the Flourishing Age Fund was also subject to a joint raid by various departments. There was no process, no brewing and no wind. The sky was bright and the sun was rising. The fiercest conflict between the new group and the academy almost reached its climax in an instant. The battlefield continued to spread. Sabers and swords flashed. Flowers bloomed everywhere and everyone was overwhelmed. Wang Xingxiao held the phone and listened to Xian Ming, the head of intelligence in Beihai, constantly talking about the latest news. He was in a daze. Obviously, even he did not really react for a while. He had thought that there would be a clear signal, and there would be a gradual escalation of the situation and process. Everything was gone. While they were still discussing and watching cautiously, the two sides had already reached the point where they were fighting with their lives on the line. In this case, what should Zhongzhou State do? What should the Southeast Group do? When Siyuan was silent for a long time, he suppressed the waves in his heart and whispered, "It's time to take action. Tell Sister Qing for me that I'll come to taste her new craft next time." Wang Xingxiao stood up. "I'll leave for Yuzhou right away. Uncle Wen, I'll take your opinion to them." Wen Siyuan nodded. Wang Xingxiao shook hands with Wen Siyuan tightly and turned to leave. Wen Siyuan stood where he was, watching his back getting farther and farther away. Zhongzhou State was stormy. The patriarch of the Wang family of Beihai, who set off from Beihai, was full of sunshine at this time. Chapter 12:19. There was another snowfall in Yuzhou. The chilly white snowflakes were floating in the skyscrapers of Yuzhou province and the sky above the old garden, covering the pavilions, terraces and mansions in the old garden, the clear west mountain, the verdant woods outside the old garden and the winding paths. The snow was getting heavier. The scenery between heaven and earth turned from light white to a vast expanse. Distant mountains, forests, heaven and earth. Everything seemed to have solidified into an almost eternal picture. Only the falling snowflakes in the air were the only things moving in this beautiful picture. There was a breathtakingly beautiful woman in this breathtakingly beautiful picture. It was a color that was completely opposite to the surrounding snow. She wore a black slim-fitting coat, black silk trousers and black high-heeled leather boots. Her black hair was like a black waterfall, occasionally dancing in the cold wind and flying snow. She stood in the best position in the old garden, looking at the vast west mountain in the distance, and under her feet was a blooming red plum blossom. This was a kind of impact that was enough to hit the depths of the soul. If there was a focus in this picture, it must be the black in this vast expanse of white. She stood there quietly with her hands in the pockets of her coat. She was graceful, but her entire person seemed to have a kind of aura. Unconsciously, it suppressed the winter plum blossoms beneath her feet, suppressed the white snow around her, suppressed the distant west mountain and forest. She was colder than the flying snow, more gorgeous than the winter plum blossom, and more piercing than the winter wind. It seemed that the beauty of the world was blooming on her. She was beautiful and flawless. Gu Xianyan looked at Sister Qin's slim back with infatuation, and her beautiful big eyes were full of amazement and envy. That figure stood there quietly, tall and straight, yet incomparably ethereal, like a peerless shadow that resided in the mortal world. It seemed that as long as it moved slightly, it would drift away with the wind and the flying snow into the untainted world. The old garden was located in a corner of the West Mountain Forest Park in Yuzhou. It did not cover an exaggerated area, and it was not famous in Yuzhou. It looked like a yuan lin with a variety of architectural styles. It was originally built in the name of a club, but in fact, it had never entertained guests. It was a private palace built by the Flourishing Age Fund for the Master of Samsara Palace, occupying the best position and the best view in West Mountain. Since the old garden was built, the Master of Samsara Palace had never been here once. Now it naturally became Qin Weibai's palace. This was the first time that Qin Weibai had come to her hometown, a place that most old Yuzhou people had never heard of. Snow and cold wind danced in the air. In the cold air, she stood there quietly for a long time. No one knew what she was thinking. She was like an ice goddess meditating in the wind and snow, with a kind of awe-inspiring and dreamy dignity that could not be blasphemed. Nearly 100 staff members in the entire old garden were serving Qin Weibai alone. No one came to the old garden on weekdays, but the daily operation did not stop. Nearly 100 staff members were the professionally trained elites that Han Donglu transferred from his own club. Today they saw the owner of the old garden for the first time. They were shocked and inevitably whispered. Of course, they did not dare to have any malice, but they could not avoid the curiosity in their hearts. It's the first time that I've seen a woman like Madam. Is she the owner here? Who do you think she is? In the open hall, professional waiters put the dishes on the table one by one. Some took the wine and some put the tableware. Their movements were light. In the corner, several waiters gathered together and looked at Qin Weibai standing outside the hall from a distance. They whispered. They were all very young and beautiful. One of them had just graduated from college this year. In that well-known university, she also had the reputation of the department belle. However, the appearance of Qin Weibai had completely subverted their understanding of beauty. The so-called beauty turned out to be not the kind of limit that beautiful appearance, clothes, and cosmetics matched with the limit. The real beauty had no limit. It was the kind of unimaginable but real perfection. It was the kind of holy and untouchable that was close but far away. Who knows? Another waiter shook his head and whispered, "She asked us to call her Madam. This should be her husband's place, right? I've worked here for almost 2 years and I haven't seen the owner yet. Such a woman should be owned by another man. As a woman, I feel a little heartbroken when I think about it. She has such a strong aura. Even if she is the president of a super multinational company or the speaker of a certain place, I will believe it. The speaker is unlikely. She is too young. But maybe she is the daughter-in-law of a member of parliament or a director. Such a woman, her life is not something we can imagine. Is that little girl Madam's daughter? When she grows up, she won't be much worse than her mother. Maybe Madam is waiting for her husband? Daughter? Are you kidding me? Madam is obviously very young. How can she have such an old daughter? Is it a sister? Yeah. I'm not sure about her age. Maybe 20, maybe 30. But her skin is so good, just like a little girl who has been carefully cared for. Madam just looked at me and my scalp is still numb now. Little girl? You're so funny. The discussion continued in a trance and envy. It seemed that they all believed that Madam was waiting for her husband. In the hall, exquisite dishes were served one by one, looking and smelling good. The deep and melodious bell rang in the old garden, echoing in the snowy world. Qin Weibai raised her wrist and looked at her watch. Almost at the same time she lowered her head, a figure being led over outside the moon gate beside her also stopped. It was a woman who appeared outside the moon gate. Compared to Qin Weibai, who was 175 meters tall and was wearing high-heeled leather boots, she was very petite. She was wearing a dark windbreaker, a beige scarf, a black skirt and a pair of marten shoes. It was a simple combination, but when she put it on, there was a sense that these clothes should belong to her and only her. There was a sense of harmony in them, as if they were made by nature. Her carefully groomed chestnut curls were scattered lazily. This was also a woman who was so beautiful that it was hard to tell her specific age. Maybe she was not as beautiful as Qin Weibai, but it was enough to make people toss and turn unforgettable. Mature, gentle, quiet, well-behaved, charming and full of charm. She seemed to be in her 20s, in her 30s or in her 40s. On different occasions, in front of different people, her every expression, every movement, every smile, every word, every different face, and every temperament that could be switched freely seemed to be able to satisfy all the beautiful fantasies of men about women. She might not have the strength to fight tit for tat with countless superiors in various fields without falling into a disadvantageous position. She did not have the temperament to be unmoved by the wind and rain. She did not have the treacherous and unpredictable tactics that were impossible to guard against. But when such a woman stood in front of him, she still gave people the feeling that she was unfathomable. She was a woman. But she was also like countless women. Charming, lazy and naive, noble and elegant, delicate and pitiful. There seemed to be countless faces under her beautiful face. She and Qin Weibai could be said to be the kind of people who made different choices. Qin Weibai chose to conquer the world by herself. She gave all her charm, enthusiasm and charm to Li Tianlan without reservation. She even gave her country to Li Tianlan. She did not have the ability to conquer the world, but she used all her charm, enthusiasm and charm to control the man who could conquer the world. Qin Weibai looked up and saw her. She also saw Qin Weibai at the same time. The somewhat petite but exceptionally exquisite delicate body stood there. For a moment, under the flying snow, all her hidden faces seemed to be frozen. She looked at Qin Weibai, and all her emotions seemed to turn into the deepest vigilance in the shortest time. Qin Weibai laughed. Her voice was clear, but it fell in the woman's ears like thunder. "Mask, it's our first time meeting. I've heard a lot about you." After a pause, she continued, "You know me, don't you? So there's no need for me to introduce myself." The masked lady's body tensed up. Her eyes were either misty or hazy, and the vigilance in them was almost tangible. She was like a cat protecting its own secret. Her hair stood up quietly, but she tried to maintain her shock. "I've heard a lot about you? What's there to look up to about me? Did you ask me out?" "Yes." Qin Weibai's smile was impeccable. Whether it was her appearance, temperament, or her own style, she almost crushed the mask in front of her. "I've wanted to talk to you for a long time. A long, long time ago, but I never had the chance until now." Mask took a step back subconsciously. She was a little short of breath. The last trace of calmness seemed to have become her shield, which she held tightly. In the face of Qin Weibai's calm sharpness, she felt that she saw a trace of gradually expanding cracks on the shield, which made her panic. "If there's nothing else, I'll go first." Mask took a deep breath and said in a soft voice, "Do you know what the name of this place is?" Qin Weibai chuckled and directly gave the answer. "This is the hometown." Mask's body was a little stiff. "The hometown?" She whispered the word and her eyes were in a trance. No one knew what she was thinking of. "You're a very cautious person. I know you very well." Qin Weibai said faintly, "You know me. You know who I am, so you're on guard against me and even afraid. But do you really want to go? If you really wanted to go, you wouldn't have come today. Well, you can say that you don't know that I asked you out. But you're so cautious that you can keep the appointment because of a word. I can be sure that some things are very important to you. So, compared with your vigilance against me now, which one is more important?" Mask's expression kept changing. She was a little tangled and looked more delicate and pitiful, which made people want to hold her in their arms and comfort her. In the light footsteps, Gu Xianyan trotted over and stood beside Qin Weibai. She looked curiously at the strange and charming woman in front of her, as if she didn't know the relationship between her and Qin Weibai. Your life shouldn't have been like this. Qin Weibai said softly, don't you really want to know what happened in the depths of West Lake in Lin and 25 years ago? Like a peerless swordsman with outstanding beauty, Qin Weibai looked at the struggling eyes of Mask and thrust her sword straight to the vital part. Jiang Nishang? Or should I call you Gu Qingqiu? Gu Qingqiu's face was pale and her body was shaking. She even couldn't stand steadily. She stared at Qin Weibai with unconcealable fear in her eyes. It seemed that the shield she held in front of her had finally lost the sharpness of Qin Weibai. The last trace of calmness was torn apart in Qin Weibai's whisper. Her defense line was shaky and about to collapse. How do you know? She tried to open her mouth, but her voice, which was originally very beautiful, became a little hoarse. Gu Xianyan narrowed her eyes and looked seriously at the strange woman in front of her. Although she was very young, no one really treated her as a child, whether she was with Qin Weibai or in Kunlun City. She was cultivated regardless of her age. Gu Xingyun regarded her as a chain that might be able to tie Li Tianlan or other super heavyweights in the future. And Qin Weibai felt that she needed to cultivate a successor. Therefore, the sensitive situation of outsiders looking at flowers in the fog was never a secret to Gu Xianyan. It was never a secret to her. As long as she wanted to know, she could know the basic sequence of events. The flames of war had spread all over Zhongzhou State. Late at night 7 days ago, Li Huaqing personally flew to Emperor Dong's palace and had not returned to Zhongzhou State yet. In the morning after that night, the academy and the new group began to pour fire on each other almost at the same time. 7 days was neither a long time nor a short time. When the resources of both sides were fully mobilized, everyone could smell the fierce smoke of gunpowder after the war. As of today, the two groups affiliated to the Flourishing Age Fund had been in trouble. One of them might face a huge fine of more than 1 billion Zhongzhou dollars, and the other was likely to be completely closed down. Many departments were completely firing at the Flourishing Age Fund. The stocks of many listed companies affiliated to the Flourishing Age Fund were shaking violently. The groups that had dealings with the Flourishing Age Fund in many fields were a little uneasy. This brief introduction affected the entire stock market of Zhongzhou State. The Flourishing Age Fund was so big that almost no one knew its specific scale except for Han Donglu. This neutral wealthy family, which seemed to be a financial giant entrenched in Huading on the surface, had quietly extended its tentacles to all aspects in the past. Energy, aerospace, minerals, real estate, internet, construction, hotels, film and television media, medicine and health, electricity, communications, automobile manufacturing, insurance, fashion, daily necessities, retail. The shadow of the Flourishing Age Fund could be seen everywhere in dozens of fields. In more fields, the Flourishing Age Fund seemed not to be directly involved, but it held a large number of shares of other groups. Such a situation of great momentum was destined to have withered branches, and there were all kinds of birds in the woods. It was inevitable that some black sheep would appear, which was something that even Han Donglu could not control. The Flourishing Age Fund found more and more problems in 7 days. Han Donglu, who had flown from Yuzhou to the headquarters of Huading, was calm and collected. But the joint investigation of various departments was getting more and more difficult. It was not that they could not find any problems but that they were afraid. In just a few days, the overall loss of the Flourishing Age Fund had reached billions, and there were also a lot of righteous forces involved. Everyone could see the continuous bleeding of the new group, but everyone could also see the growing shock in the economic field of Zhongzhou State. The whole parliament was a little uneasy, and there were even voices that some problems should be handled with caution. Several prominent international funds seemed to have aimed at the stock market of Zhongzhou State and were ready to make a move. Star State also seemed to have a plan to announce the appreciation of Star Dollar. Everyone was waiting for an opportunity or a suitable node, and then they could give a fatal blow to the economy of Zhongzhou State. Everyone knew that it would be very convenient to start with the Flourishing Age Fund, and they could also find some problems. They did find problems, but they also found that the Flourishing Age Fund they knew was only the tip of the iceberg of the real Flourishing Age Fund. With the deepening of the investigation, the huge outline of the Flourishing Age Fund beyond the limits of everyone's imagination had faintly emerged. It was a huge and incredible monster. And this was just the industry of the Flourishing Age Fund in Zhongzhou State. What else did the Flourishing Age Fund have in the world? If the economy of the entire Flourishing Age Fund was combined, Some people had estimated that it was even a behemoth close to the economy of the Wang family of Beihai. The confrontation between the academy and the new group was in full swing. But no one dared to joke about the future of Zhongzhou State. Therefore, the joint investigation of various departments was getting more and more difficult, and the pressure from all sides was increasing. The academics were looking for a new breakthrough. The internal turmoil of the Flourishing Age Fund was turbulent, but in 7 days, Liaodong had already been in turmoil. Tan Xiaotian had been officially investigated in secret 3 days ago. Originally, everyone thought that it was just the problem of the National Highway Reconstruction Project of Feng Tian. After knowing that Wang Wei, the leader of the 3rd inspection team, had entered Jiangxia, Bai Qingqian wanted to slap Wang Wei in the face. But no one expected that Bai Qingqian was completely touched this time, and she completely fell out with him. From the feedback from all sides, the problem of the National Highway Reconstruction could only be regarded as a trivial matter for Tan Xiaotian. His real problem was in Anong. It was an illegal trade network he built in Anong that connected the peninsula, and from the peninsula to the periphery of Snow Country in Goryeo. It involved the scope of polar light, from food to population to arms. Tan Xiaotian could get huge profits just by saying hello. At present it was not clear how big this dark economic chain was, but a conservative estimate showed that the amount had exceeded hundreds of billions. Tan Xiaotian. Hundreds of billions. The two were obviously not the same concept. So how many people were involved in the hundreds of billions? Anong developed very fast in Liaodong, and it was also jokingly known as the secretary class. At its peak there were 13 directors in Anong and 7 of them were secretaries. Such a scene was rare in the whole Zhongzhou state. People jokingly discussed that Anong developed very fast so the big bosses would put their trusted secretaries to guild. When the time came there would be a golden road in front of them. Tan Xiaotian's resume seemed to confirm this. From the mayor of Anong to the deputy speaker of Feng Tian, although the rank was the same, the prospects were completely different. After the election in a few months, no matter where he went, Tan Xiaotian would definitely be a deputy governor, which had something to do with the rapid development of Anong. But when this illegal trade chain appeared, everyone was considering whether the big bosses put their secretaries in Anong to gild or to protect some secrets that could not be exposed. No one knew where this idea came from, but in just a few days, it had become very popular in Liaodong. Today, in addition to Tan Xiaotian, 3 directors in Anong had been secretly investigated by the Ministry of Supervision of Liaodong. There was no doubt that these 3 people were secretaries, and one of them was the secretary of the current governor of Liaodong. A monstrous storm was brewing in Liaodong. Everyone could guess the answer that was about to break out of the shell and was destined to be earth-shattering. No one expected that Bai Qingqian would act so fiercely. She did want to deal with Tan Xiaotian and Wang Wei, but what she wanted to do this time was to completely destroy the core base of the academics and capture all the forces of the academics in one fell swoop. The monstrous pressure pressed down from the parliament to Liaodong. Not only the academics but also individuals from the giant group, the southeast group, and even the north group called Bai Qingqian, trying to suppress this matter, or at least control it within a certain range. At this time Hua Xingyang, the leader of the academy in Yuzhou, the vice minister of the cabinet, had a thorough talk with Bai Qingqian. The conversation between the two was almost a reprimand from Hua Xingyang to Bai Qingqian. Vice Minister Hua clearly told Bai Qingqian that the parliament supported her work, but hoped that she would not make a fuss and make trouble out of nothing. In the current situation, stability came first. Bai Qingqian, however, was tit for tat and did not give any face to the leader of the academy. Her response at that time was also very clear to Gu Xianyan, because after this incident, Qin Weibai and Bai Qingqian talked on the phone and did not avoid her at that time. Bai Qingqian said so at that time. Tan Xiaotian's problem is not only a problem of Zhongzhou state, but also a serious injury to our friendship with the peninsula. Vice Minister Hua, you can think about how serious the consequences will be if this matter is suppressed. One day, when the people of the peninsula who can't even eat enough and can't even afford to wear clothes learn that their young and beautiful women have come to Zhongzhou state to engage in various industries under the temptation of people like Tan Xiaotian, what kind of situation and consequences will it be? Can you and Liaodong bear the consequences? This question could be said to be powerful and resonant. Hua Xingyang even threw the phone on the spot. At present, the 3rd supervisory group was still active in Jiangxia. But the team leader, Wang Wei, had already closed his door and did not participate in the summary meeting of the supervisory group. Tan Xiaotian's accident directly made Wang Wei's reputation in Zhongzhou state drop to the freezing point. Everyone was still waiting for Tan Xiaotian to be completely broken through, waiting for this storm to completely engulf the few big shots standing at the top of Liaodong. Under such circumstances, it seemed that they were afraid of the complete rebound of the academics, so the giant group also began to quiet down. Bai Zhanfeng and Zhou Mulin, who had already had a countermeasure, began to quietly put away the cards in their hands that they were ready to play, waiting for the right time. As a result, the flames of the two battlefields of Liaodong and the Flourishing Age Fund continued to burn, igniting the overall situation. Under such circumstances, Qin Weibai, who had been quiet in Yuzhou, suddenly made an appointment with this woman in front of her, which made Gu Xianyan instinctively feel that something was wrong. At this time, Qin Weibai could not meet a meaningless person. Gu Qingqiu. Jiang Nishang. Gu Xianyan blinked her watery eyes and looked at the woman in front of her. What kind of impact could she have on the next overall situation? Her surname was Gu. Was she from Kunlun City? It shouldn't be. Otherwise, how could she not know her? Qin Weibai looked at Gu Qingqiu quietly, looking at the horror in her eyes. If these two names were a sword that pierced the vital point, then Qin Weibai's next words were a fatal blow. You are 36 years old this year, and you have been carrying out tasks since you were 21. Your code name is Fairy, and your secondary code name is Mask. Those who know these two code names think that there are two people. In fact, both code names are you. You desire freedom like photography and have always dreamed of traveling all over the world. But if you want to fulfill this dream, you need to continue working for another 14 years. You like Switzerland and want to settle down there. Someone promised you a large sum of money when you were 50 years old and helped you get Swiss citizenship. But you have never been to Switzerland. If the farthest place you have been is England because your child is studying there. You should have just entered middle school this year. You had a boyfriend in college. During your mission you even performed an abortion for your boyfriend. That was your biggest mistake. You still contact him occasionally but you don't love him anymore. You even want to... Enough? Gu Qingqiu's body fell to the ground. She covered her ears, shook her head wildly and screamed. Qin Weibai looked at her with a smile. She was not indifferent or enthusiastic. There was a touch of trance and sadness in her eyes. You're afraid. She whispered. What are you afraid of? Are you afraid that I will tell these things to your master, or afraid that I will tell these things to your man? Gu Qingqiu raised her eyes and looked at Qin Weibai. Her eyes seemed to be looking at a devil in an angel's clothes. Why do you know these? Why do you know these? Impossible, Gu Qingqiu muttered to herself. She seemed to be on the verge of collapse. Qin Weibai did not speak. She turned and walked to the antique open hall. Gu Xianyan looked at Gu Qingqiu seriously. She hesitated and trotted to follow Qin Weibai, like a butterfly. Qin Weibai walked into the hall and took off her coat. The simple pure white sweater outlined her figure and looked more charming and soft. Gu Xianyan gently pulled her hand and whispered, Sister, she is... Qin Weibai sat on the chair, looked out of the window and said calmly, Li Shi's successor is also your predecessor. If you continue to stay in Kunlun City, you can get in touch with her about a year later. She will become your teacher. Gu Xianyan's brain was stunned for a moment. She opened her small mouth wide and looked stunned. Her predecessor. Li Shi's successor. This identity could not be more obvious. Kunlun City, the previous generation of Phoenix Pavilion. Master. Gu Xianyan shook her head subconsciously, feeling a little confused. Gu Qingqiu. This was a figure hidden at the bottom of Kunlun City's secrets. Gu Xianyan was not surprised that there was such a figure in Kunlun City. But the previous pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion turned out to be a figure hidden at the bottom of Kunlun City's secrets. She stayed in Kunlun City for several years. The two invincible realm experts in Kunlun City were both her teachers. She was in daily contact with the high-level officials of Kunlun City. They would teach Gu Xianyan their experience in various aspects, and they would talk about some random things when chatting. But, Gu Qingqiu. She had never heard of this name before. Not even once. Did no one know of her existence? Or did everyone know but did not tell her? 25 years ago, Gu Xianyan recalled this time point. That should be the time when the Li family collapsed and Li Shi officially completed her task and became the wife of the Lord of Kunlun City. At that time, did Kunlun City find a second pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion? No. Gu Qingqiu was 36 years old this year. According to Qin Weibai, Gu Qingqiu should have joined Kunlun City 25 years ago. She was 11 years old that year. Qin Weibai said that she started to carry out tasks at the age of 21. In other words, Gu Qingqiu was the pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion 15 years ago? 15 years. 25 years. For such a long time, Kunlun City had been hiding her in the deepest place? So who was her task target? Gu Xianyan suddenly felt that Gu Xingyun was a little scary. Putting everything else aside, just the depth of his thoughts that were hidden in the dark was something that most people couldn't compare to. Sister, who is her task target? Gu Xianyan asked cautiously. Phoenix Pavilion had not been established for a long time in Kunlun City. Li Shi was the first pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion. Her task target was the youngest invincible realm expert in the world at that time, the first person of the young generation in Zhongzhou State at that time, the heavenly son of the Li family whose edge could suppress Wang Tianzong, the youngest marshal in Zhongzhou State at that time, and the future god of war in Zhongzhou State, Li Kuangtu. Li Shi, the first pavilion master, successfully destroyed Li Kuangtu. Gu Xianyan was the third pavilion master of Phoenix Pavilion. Kunlun City's target was even more terrifying. Li Tianlan. This was a pavilion master who took Li Tianlan as her task target. Was she arrogant and conceited? Did she have no F***king idea? Was she ignorant? It was really not. Kunlun City regarded her as the third pavilion master. It seemed to be just a simple identity, but in fact, for this identity, all departments of Phoenix Pavilion had made the most cautious and meticulous analysis, and there were millions of theoretical reports to support this conclusion. They made Gu Xianyan the third pavilion master, which meant that they firmly believed that Gu Xianyan was qualified to hunt Li Tianlan. That million-word theoretical report was the foundation that supported all of this. They would analyze Li Tianlan's character in terrifying detail, summarize his preferences, collect all kinds of details about him, all his hobbies, and then cultivate Gu Xianyan from various fields. This kind of targeting was undoubtedly the most terrifying and impeccable. The cultivated Gu Xianyan might not be the most perfect, but it was certain that, in the analysis of Kunlun City, such Gu Xianyan must be the most perfect in Li Tianlan's eyes. Of course, Gu Xianyan couldn't do this now. But there was no problem with everything. Li Tianlan was young enough and Gu Xianyan was immature enough. She still had a lot of time to grow up and be cultivated. Kunlun City had enough strength to equip her from all aspects. In this process, how many resources to mobilize and how much money to spend were not the issues that Kunlun City considered at all. They could spend tens of billions just to cultivate a woman who could stay with Li Tianlan and make him love her so much. Then the tens of billions of funds were valuable, and it would definitely bring Kunlun City a return that far exceeded the cost. This was the idea that Kunlun City built Phoenix Pavilion. And this idea was indeed successful now. They cultivated Li Shi, successfully overthrew the Li family and replaced it. Li Shi hunted Li Kuangtu in the past. Gu Xianyan would hunt Li Tianlan in the future. This was Gu Xingyun's plan. There were always some people who said that smart people would not fall in the same place twice. In fact, history always repeated itself. Kunlun City was full of confidence. Because this was the core secret of their success. No one would doubt the way to make themselves successful, at least not before they failed. Therefore, the first and third Phoenix Pavilion Masters had absolutely powerful hunting targets. Then what about the second Phoenix Pavilion Master? This woman was so low-key that she seemed to not exist even in Kunlun City. She hid so deeply. This woman who had been on duty for 15 years and had successfully hunted for 15 years? Who was her target? Qin Weibai looked at the wine in front of her, then picked up the freshly squeezed orange juice on the side, poured herself a glass and whispered, "It's Qing Shilai." Gu Xianyan didn't speak for a while. Maybe she didn't react or maybe she couldn't believe it at all. She blinked and tilted her head to look at Qin Weibai. "Sister, who are you talking about?" "Qing Shilai." Qin Weibai's voice was calm. Gu Xianyan didn't respond. She seemed to be almost numb by the impact of this name. Qing Shilai. This was a name that was not very familiar to the people of Zhongzhou State. Because of his low profile, many media would often mention it even when reporting. At his behest, a department replaced his name. Ministry of Personnel. Qing Shilai. Zhongzhou State Counselor, Minister of the Ministry of Personnel of Zhongzhou State, Li Huaqing's first confidant, and the academic's first corps general. He was also one of the most popular flag-type figures of the academics today. He was recognized as the most low-key counselor in Zhongzhou State, and also one of the most courageous counselors in the parliament. If the most simple sentence was used to describe Qing Shilai's weight in Zhongzhou State, he was the strongest opponent of Wang Qinglei from the Wang family of Beihai. Yes, it was Wang Qinglei who had a bright future in the Wang family of Beihai. Not the current Wang Qinglei. If it weren't for Li Huaqing's re-election in this election, Qing Shilai would almost certainly be pushed into the director's seat by the academics without any accident. And even if Li Huaqing was re-elected, Qing Shilai was still very likely to become one of the directors of Zhongzhou State after the election, one step ahead of Wang Qinglei. Even if he couldn't go further, he would continue to sit in the position of Minister of the Ministry of Personnel, with students all over Zhongzhou State and a more solid foundation. After 5 years, the possibility of him directly succeeding Li Huaqing would also greatly increase. There was no doubt. Qing Shilai's existence was the academics' greatest hope in the post-Li Huaqing era. When Wang Qinglei's future was obscure, Qing Shilai, who was getting more and more stable, was almost the heir in everyone's eyes. What did this mean? Qing Shilai, the academics, Kunlun City, Phoenix Pavilion. This is terrible. Gu Xianyan muttered to herself, Gu Xingyun is terrible. Yes, he put a woman with Qing Shilai for 15 years. The most important thing is that she never made any request to Qing Shilai. She just silently waited for Qing Shilai to become a director or to climb to the top of Zhongzhou State. In terms of long-term planning, Gu Xingyun can be regarded as a true disciple of the Li family. Qin Weibai's voice was a little subtle. In her sight, Gu Qingqiu, bathed in the wind and snow, stood up shakily and looked deeply at Qin Weibai in the hall. The two people's eyes met, and there seemed to be sparks in the air that were enough to burn the flying snow. Qin Weibai's expression was cold and proud. She raised the orange juice in her hand, and through the bright and transparent floor-to-ceiling window in the hall, she greeted from a distance. Gu Qingqiu hesitated and took a step forward. Qin Weibai raised the corner of her mouth. She could bring disaster to the country and people. Sister, you want to use Gu Qingqiu to destroy Qing Shilai? Even destroy the whole academics? Gu Xianyan was a little excited. After all, she was a child. No matter how mature she was, the childishness of wanting the world to be in chaos still existed. Destroy the academics? Qin Weibai couldn't help laughing. How is it possible? Even if Qing Shilai falls, it will at most frustrate the layout of the academics for the next 10 years, far from being destroyed. Kunlun City has bet heavily on Qing Shilai. In other words, Qing Shilai is now flawless. Because Gu Qingqiu has never made any request to him that goes against his own position, nor has she done anything excessive. Gu Qingqiu is indeed from Phoenix Pavilion, but in Gu Xingyun's eyes, before Qing Shilai reaches the top, she does nothing but complete the task. Qin Weibai blinked her eyes and said softly, so, although Gu Qingqiu's background can't be changed just from looking at it now, she's actually just Qing Shilai's lover. Moreover, she's an extremely obedient and dutiful type. What impact can a lover have on Qing Shilai? Even if it's exposed, it's just like that. Not to mention any punishment, there won't even be a verbal criticism. Destroying the academics like this, unless the academics is made of paper. Then you are, Gu Xianyan was a little confused. Since she had doubts, she naturally had to ask. She was the successor cultivated by Qin Weibai, and Gu Xianyan also understood this. No matter how intelligent the goddess was, no matter how invincible Emperor Dong was, they would eventually grow old and could not disobey the will of time, but Emperor Dong's palace would always exist. And Gu Xianyan was the best candidate to assist the future palace lord of Emperor Dong's palace in Qin Weibai's expectation. From now on, Gu Xianyan would absorb everything and grow wildly. I need to detonate Gu Qingqiu, the bomb, and use Qing Shilai to test something that I have always been confused about, but it's very important. Qin Weibai's eyes narrowed slightly and she continued, and the outside world is now guessing what trump card Li Huaqing has in Emperor Dong's palace. They don't know, but I do. Li Huaqing does have a trump card in his hand, and his trump card can indeed persuade Tianlan to compromise in an instant, which will be far more beneficial than the purgatory of heaven capital. It's just that Li Huaqing himself is hesitating whether to play this card or not, so there is the current confrontation. If Qing Shilai's matter is exposed, the subsequent impact will also indirectly stimulate Li Huaqing, so that he will make up his mind earlier and end all this. Qin Weibai's red lips were soft, and her white teeth gently bit the straw. It's like killing two birds with one stone. Gu Qingqiu finally made up her mind and walked into the hall. She took off her scarf and coat, standing opposite Qin Weibai, looking at her silently with a calm expression. Qin Weibai chuckled, reached out her hand and said lightly, "Please sit down. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.